man, you clearly know how to mix. Everything is contained. Everything is held together. There's glue. It feels good. But what's the thing? What's that excitement?
Yes.
What's that thing that you're gonna that feels like tangible and you can reach out and touch
the
it?
risk.
Yeah, it's the risk,
Yeah.
and that's what gives an engineer or a producer their identity, their voice, their aesthetic, all these words that we try to use and pinpoint.
The voice. I think the whole thing's an interesting topic.
It's
this whole
huge.
thing about hearing and how it works and why MP3s work.
That was another thing
Like-
I wanted to bring up in regards to Spotify and Apple Music and these algorithms that are determining, what did you call it, the ERB?
The bands and it's like a
Yeah.
multi-band sensitivity.
Yeah,
Well, it's the
Matrix.
bands of hearing. It's the sort of bands that work together. I'm
In the
explaining it
brain,
really
in
poorly.
the brain, or
In
at the ear.
in the brain. Yeah, in the brain-ear interface, I guess.
Yeah,
you know?
so an algorithm that is determining what frequencies can be sacrificed for file size management.
At what moment?
At what moment?
Yeah.
One, I don't think should be up to an algorithm, especially when the fact that we can stream 4K video on Netflix and Apple TV. I'm not sure why we can't necessarily do that in audio and why they are deciding what frequencies
Maybe
they're
it's
dipping.
profitability. Do you need like more bandwidth and
Massively, yeah.
and servers and
server costs, yeah. But,
so
but
overhead
Sure.
for companies?
But mostly we've got the
That's very anti-music.
it is
Well, I'm just wondering why it exists.
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
But,
Yeah.
Like,
but
why
also,
haven't we gone there when it's
unfortunately,
possible?
well, we have.
Well, you have to recode the software, right? And there's a guy that came up with the MFit, right? The Master for iTunes concept, and he's reformatting and recoding Apple Music right now to be able to handle WAV files. I did meet someone at Warner Digital that was discussing that with me. This guy, he created the MFit format that mastering engineers are delivering, and what it means to deliver something for Apple.
Very little in real terms. That was not a win.
Yeah, I think he's on to a bigger win right now.
Yeah, no, I think I might know who you're speaking about, but
Yeah,
But
you probably
yeah.
know more about this, honestly.
yeah, there was MFit was trumpeted as some kind of moment, and it
Yeah.
really wasn't.
Yeah.
It
It did lower the possibility for distortion, though, correct?
it did.
But-
Yeah, the nature of compression we have to be more careful. The nature of these algorithms that use data compression.
Data compression,
So
exactly.
there are three types in the popular world that we come across. There's MP3, which used to be proprietary and now is not anymore. The licensing has ended from Fraunhofer, the people who invented it or who licensed it. You have AAC, which is a more advanced form of that same kind of concept, and then Ogg Vorbis, which is the cheap, basically open source version, which is the worst sounding of the three. Very easy to prove. You can make your own. You can take a file, make an AAC, an MP3, and an Ogg Vorbis file at the same approximate size and compare them blind, and it's pretty obvious that Ogg, which is the one Spotify uses because it's free, is the worst sounding. And even within MP3, there's like different codecs. There's the Fraunhofer codec and the Lame codec, which again was a kind of a public open source one. And the difference there is enormous.
Yeah.
And just, if you want to go there, we started someplace which was, MPIT.
Yeah.
Yes, all of these data compression schemes are more likely to clip as you approach 0 dBFS, and leaving headroom, stopping a dB short, or really it should be a couple of dB short.
Yeah, Spotify says 2.
Is wise, yeah.
Yeah, they asked for 2.
Nobody's given up 2 dB.
Nobody. Well, because it wouldn't compete against the rough mix.
Not even close.
Not even close.
And
So you'd always think
So their
it's not as
guidelines
good.
are wrong?
What? No. Well,
Saying it should be -2 and it'll come out better?
no.
Is that the claim?
I don't think that's the claim.
It's not wrong.
No, I think it's completely
but-
correct. We should all be delivering something not at 0 peak. If the platform that is the majority is
The
being
delivery
listened to,
standards are -2. Why are we not all doing it?
because competition to get the approval across the line. I mean, this is my daily struggle, right?
Well,
Can you get the approval across the line and then deliver the deliverable?
Yeah, Dale Becker has been trying to do that, and labels like, wait, we're not going to send another version of a master that the artist didn't approve to the DSPs. It's not going to happen.
What if
the artist approved
What
this
if they
version.
have different deliverable?
I think
standards,
we tried on the Khalid album, and he got it so far across the line, and the admin at RCA approved that this was okay. We had MFit, and then we had mastered for Spotify. And the last minute, it's like, we've never done this. So and so at Sony says we can't approve this. We're giving the MFit across the board. And Dale almost had a victory there. We were really pumped for it.
Well, here's the thing.
Barrel of snakes.
So let's say we're making a modern record, a modern pop record, and we're mastering fairly loud, and then we're picking our peak level. So there's the difference between the sort of LUFS, the integrated level, and the peak level, right? You can have an incredibly compressed, loud, clipped, like I would classically, in years gone by, I would have clipped the fuck out of a master and turned it down so that as I would explain to clients, I don't care how much clipping we decide to bake in. Like if you want to put the mix through a rat pedal, and then I'll clip the fuck out of it, but I don't want there to be surprise clipping when it gets in the real world.
That has nothing to do with the ceiling of the master.
Exactly.
That has to do with the character of the master.
The character of the master, exactly. Yeah. So I would always try and separate those two things. Like, we can clip the fuck out of this, but I don't want to be surprised later. But the reality is that the ground you give up to be safe from, intersample peaks and the things that people are scared of, you give up a lot of ground for very little win. So if you listen to a lot of the records you love, they're full of intersample peaks, and it just doesn't matter because they happen on snare drums and they happen on very clipped, aggressive sections of the song, and our ears don't perceive them. It's obscured
the content.
Exactly. Yeah. So a lot of the conversation in this space, and I really would have prepped better for this if I thought we were going to go here tonight.
No, we can come back to this.
I mean, the grand tour of distortion is something.
I have something more. I have something more to add to this that I think will be more relevant. But
there's stuff that I really want to dig into. But what I will say is that I feel very strongly that the voices there seem to be two camps at play when we talk about loudness. There's super fucking uptight people, none of which have made a record that you've ever heard of, who own things like the dynamic range meter, and they
don't know what that is.
There's a whole hi-fi community who give DR scores to records. Khalid's Talk has a DR score, and you may have violated some rule or not.
Please inform me about my violations.
And
find me.
Their thesis is that the more dynamic range something has, the better, and that's horseshit. Because I love records that are loud as fuck and nasty, and I hate some records that are super dynamic.
Seems really arbitrary.
Exactly. It's ridiculous.
Measure.
And mostly these people have no credibility in the space because they're not making records anyone cares about or has ever heard of. And then you have, at the other side, the sort of mostly faceless, mostly nameless, certainly not speaking about it people who are making records at the highest level, people who are knocking out masters all day, every day in Sterling, that have a dB, 2 dB, 3 dB of intersample peaks, and they're not making a case for it. They're not telling people, they're not talking about it. And why would they? They're just making records, right?
Right.
They're not. They didn't sign up to be a leader in a thought space. So
they didn't start a podcast.
But you have this vacuum. Right? So we've got these two camps and no one's talking intelligently about it. And I feel there's a kind of a militant thing about, we need to be more dynamic. We need to have no distortion. And it's like, some of it is really not a problem.
What, Michael?
One of our moves.
I just did the research and
I was watching. I saw the album cover come up on your iPad.
Sorry to tell you, but Talk got a DR score of 4
out of.
I think it's out of 10.
Get out of here. That's so dynamic, though. That's so funny because that record is...
Oh, no, sorry, out of 14 plus.
No, 4 out of 4.
That's ridiculous.
Compared to Brahms, you're fucking music.
Yeah,
and that's what I mean, the absurdity of this
compared
scale.
to other top 10 or top 40 songs at that time, I would argue, and I'd like to find out the truth, that sounds like it'd be closer to 12 to 14 on that because...
I bet you'd be in the lowest percentile for top 40.
This is you're highlighting it perfectly. This is what's so absurd.
Yeah, it's so
that these
absurd.
Guys are benchmarking.
Thank you for looking that up.
Yeah, it also pales in comparison to the Presidents of the United States of America record from 2020, which got a DR score of 11.
Oh my God, I don't know what that record is.
No one mastered
How many
it.
copies did that sell?
Keep track.
Wait. Okay, that's amazing. Can we move to the saturation comment? Because I think in a sense they go hand in hand, because I want to know why you hate saturation.
why is
because
it so complicated?
I think about saturation very specifically as the ability to add density and the apparent loudness to a mix that can then compete and live next to these overly loud, not dynamic records, but have enough dynamics to quote unquote feel dynamic, but they're also competitively loud, right? This is a very specific thing that I think about on the daily. Every once in a while, I throw in the towel and I'm like, this is going to be a loud mix. This is how it was given to me and whatever. Sure. But most of the time, I'm actually actively searching for a victory in a sense, which is, can I get a few dB of dynamic headroom that did not exist in the song, and also the density that was in that rough mix that gave energy. And I think to me, it's a very forward thinking way of mixing quote unquote loud, which has a lower DRC. Is that what it is? Or am I thinking
DR score?
DRC is
the Democratic Republic of Congo.
No, Romani Conti wine, like that. The $10,000 Burgundy wines.
Domaine Romani Conti. Yeah. Wow.
I was like, are you talking about wine right now?
Wow.
But how do you, like, the win is to reduce dynamic range without compressing per se.
And I want to bring Rory back into this, because it's, to me, it's specific where, yes, there are very highly dynamic records that you can't even hear a sound in the first verse that should be there to feel something from. There's got to be a fine line of I don't even know how to really characterize this, but competitive dynamic to hold up in.
Of course.
But I think the way we use the term saturation is super useful.
Yes, that's why I'm wondering why you hate it.
It's this distortion sort of, there's a curve to any of these distortion models, and you're using it to reduce dynamic range without using a compressor, which has artifacts that are unpleasant, right?
Yes.
Right. But I think Rory has a problem with the term saturation because it isn't
so
that
vague.
Simple.
Yes.
Well, it's been co-opted, just as the idea of dynamic range has been co-opted by this tribe that we're talking about. So it's absurd to me. I
can't believe it was a 4.
I don't actually care. But I don't actually care if your record is dynamic. I care if it makes me feel something. Mm-hmm. So, when people talk about dynamic records and not, crush records, I like good records.
Yes.
I don't care if they're loud or soft. I haven't seen a correlation between dynamic and good.
Agreed.
And crushed and bad. Some of my favorite records are crushed and good. And I've heard lots of shitty dynamic records, right?
I like Morten Lindberg and Noisia.
Right.
And they are both dynamic to me.
This is my point. So I don't care if your record actually is dynamic. I want to feel good.
Is dynamic. So
No.
Dynamic is a volume reality.
It's not numeric,
but it's emotional too.
You can have
multiple dimensions.
Sorry. Yeah. You can have arrangement dynamics,
completely.
Right? And the loudness level, the number. I'm quotationing with my fingers. And I don't know why, because there's no visual here. But you can have a number that doesn't read dynamic and it can feel dynamic,
completely.
Right? So for someone that talks pretty highly or loudly about wanting quieter records because of how loudness normalization is affecting that, it doesn't necessarily mean that a record can't be loud and feel good. And I think I'm a bit of a proponent for talking about the former.
So I texted you guys last night. I went to the studio to work, went late, put up a couple of masters, was not feeling it. Just Dave and I have often talked about this thing. You get to the studio, you're not feeling it, you should probably leave. Because if you don't like what you're working on or don't like, and it wasn't that they were bad mixes, it was just I wasn't feeling it. Sure. So at that point, I'm like, okay, tonight's a write-off. I'm going to find some records I love and get inspired. And usually I can find my way back to a place where by the time I leave, I'm psyched about music. So I hit title and it was just not psyched.
That's why you texted?
There was some song with Jason Derulo and
He's still making records?
Yeah, but I didn't. The song I was suggested by Tidal. I put it on, and at the start of the song, it was like, there was like a little call out, Jason Derulo.
Still, yeah.
And it
He
was
hasn't
like,
come up with a different one.
what?
He might use that one now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really,
Is that
really
in the
good.
clear? Can you edit that out?
That was
Wait, can
hot.
you
Yeah.
start? Whoever's editing this, can
Yeah.
they start the episode with that?
Yeah, that's the moment
please.
right there.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was deeply uninspired by what I was hearing on the playlist. But the reality is that most of the records that if we were to get on Tidal right now and look at what it's, or Spotify, and what it's, the top New Music Friday, whatever, do we dislike those records because they're loud, they're not dynamic, or because they're shitty? They're shitty songs, shitty performances by singers we
No,
don't
the
believe.
most painful ones are the ones that are good material, good productions, and then the engineering is disagreeable.
Yes.
Those are the
That's
like,
what
it
I'm always
feels-
talking
and
about.
Those are the ones that
And
evoke the most.
honestly,
Yes.
they're rare. They're
Yes,
rare.
I agree.
I don't agree.
I-
I don't
is-
agree. I completely disagree.
That great. Well, I mean,
You think that the records you're talking about, the recent popular releases.
no, the ones
No.
that you think are great.
Great records. Name me a great record.
Oh, yeah,
a record you think
that's
is
rare. Okay,
great,
sorry,
and the
I was
engineering
mishearing.
is in the way.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, that's
right.
yeah.
That's rare.
This is what I'm getting at. So
Be like if
this
somebody
is,
fucked up the talk mix.
I can find those more though than I can great records that sound great. I can find more potentially great records that by the way that they sound or they're translated through the DSP, they could have been better
in the top 40 realm.
in the top 40 realm.
Gotcha.
I can hear
okay,
that
so
very often.
Let's step out of top 40 for a second.
Sure.
Let's just talk about music we love. How many records do you come across where you're like, I love this record, I love this singer, I believe everything they're saying, these songs are incredible, but the engineering or the level that it was printed at in mixing or mastering is getting in the way of engagement? For me, that's very rare.
I
yeah, I
it
think
affects me viscerally very often.
If I'm surveying the territory the way John's describing it, I think of the top 40 landscape with better productions and songs than audio engineering
Yes.
generally. Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. I think there are more better producers than there are audio engineers. And those producers have not found their collaborative partner on the engineering front. They're shipping it off to someone that they've heard great reviews of, and that person has no relationship with this person, doesn't care about their record as much as they did. And the feedback I get when I actually meet those producers is, it sounded a little bit worse than my rough. Like it wasn't thought after enough to feel improved, right? And this is a common thread with friends of mine that, not to tout myself, but then I wind up getting the gig because they're my friends. So like they've tried this out and now we come here and then we talk about it in a more theoretical, philosophical approach of what could this record be like, and here's a new approach. Whether that approach lands on attempt one is irrelevant because it's opening the floodgates to what the record could be, and then we can go further. And I don't think that's happening very regularly. So I guess my argument is these top 40 records that feel clamped and feel like they're the same as the one before it, and maybe there's value from that.
So
heavy-handed and similar.
Here's why I want to pull the conversation away from top 40, because I feel like it's like,
but that's what we work in a lot of the time.
Yeah, but this is like defining like femininity by Cosmopolitan covers. It's like let's talk
there
about,
is a bigger view for
let's,
sure.
Let's take a bigger view of music.
Please, sorry.
My point is that let's say the DR fucking Nazis get their way, right? Mm-hmm. And limiters are banned, right, tomorrow. Okay? Limiters and clippers are banned.
Limiters are canceled.
All records. Trump, they get to Trump and all records are suddenly dynamic. We would have very few. No, the increase in great records would be almost negligible.
Sorry, say that one more time?
If we got rid of clippers and limiters, the amount of great records would be negligible. Forget top 40, forget the pointy end of the pop music business.
Yeah.
in the world of music, in the world of expression, in the world of art, in the world of human engagement, in the world of deep communication, timeless communication, if we banned clippers and limiters, there would be very few more good records.
Agreed, completely.
It is they are not the problem. And this one metric that they're taking to judge the quality or not of records is absurd to me.
That's a pretty serious takedown.
But I think what I keep coming back to, I think Spider is trying to put a finer point on it for me because I'm not quite there yet either, is that though I completely agree that if a limiter was out of the picture or a clipper, first of all, I wouldn't want those out of the picture. I love when drums clip. I think that producers...
Me too.
I think Boy Wonder's drums...
Only Dale can use limiters and clippers.
Yeah.
And Rory.
No.
Dave,
You want the producer in Fruity Loops to clip their drums. I mean,
licenses?
you want that. But I think what I'm feeling from music is when I hear it, and granted, I'm biased because I'm hearing it through monitors with what we talked about earlier have really low distortion, right? So I'm hearing very transparently at specifically at low volume. Once we're activating the room, that's a different conversation and whatever, but at a low volume, and I can hear that there's zero transient on the guitar, right? There's nothing activated on the guitar. So when it's at a low volume, I'm not feeling a difference between any chord change, right? I'm not feeling a difference between the left hand and the right hand of the piano. There's literally no feeling change from the low mid to the high mid. It's all the same and walled out. I am 100% certain. There's very few things that I am certain about that I could make you feel more from that piano from it being less flat.
It's
right?
like having ice cream every meal, every day.
Exactly.
It desensitizes you quickly.
And though what my thought of as an engineer is, that might be in the velocity being all the way up in the MIDI of that piano, right? It could be on the production end, but there are ways as the engineer that is a little bit boxed in to not just leave it alone because it was that way, and ways of enhancing the dynamics with tools, not a compressor.
An EQ will automatically make it more dynamic.
Exactly. Well, in a certain...
A super compressed thing, as soon as you boost low end, you'll get more dynamic range automatically.
Yeah, you get more movement.
And
that's what we're looking at. So when I think dynamics, I think movement. I think parts that, like Tony used to say to me, he's like, man, you clearly know how to mix. Everything is contained. Everything is held together. There's glue. It feels good. But what's the thing? What's that excitement?
Yes.
What's that thing that you're gonna that feels like tangible and you can reach out and touch
the
it?
risk.
Yeah, it's the risk,
Yeah.
and that's what gives an engineer or a producer their identity, their voice, their aesthetic. All these words that we try to use and pinpoint.
The voice.
Yeah, the voicing. Of the
Can I make a case?
Yeah, please.
A case against. As an engineer who is attuned to these subtleties of dynamic range and clipping and limiting and saturation, and you engage with music quite often in this way, and you hear it as a limiting factor. I'm saying that if you got your way and we could, open up the velocity on that MIDI track, print it without the clipper, get everything, I would walk in and say, that's an okay song, not a great song.
Rory's going deeper to the source.
It's not
of
the
goodness.
limiting factor for lack of limiting factor.
Agreed. I don't fully agree. I think that there's a reaction that's subconscious from that eating sugar every day, desensitization, to make us feel that way before we can even hear the lyric of the song and judge if it's a...
So you're hearing quality melodies, quality lyrics, quality production concepts.
This is happening every day of my life.
They're strong, and the way it was recorded, and
the vocal performance is fantastic.
The way it's presented,
the lyric
to you,
is fantastic. But the way that I got asked today to clip gain and fade S's because the S's are too abrupt, and it's just like, you didn't record it right? Like that's not really in my job description to have to do that. Like it is theoretically, but if that's the only note on a mix that I'm getting, that means something was wrong with the engineering of that thing, right?
Yeah.
And granted, we have ways to fix that. It's 2020. Like I'm not going to complain about that. But it's a today
better time
example
than ever to deal with that problem.
Yeah, exactly. But it's still a problem, right?
Yes.
That problem can go all the way down to the first guitar riff or piano that is supporting the song.
Sure.
And the song might be so good that we're incapable of feeling or hearing or understanding how good it is. I actually think that we might be working on different records, and that may be why we're trying to
totally
push against each other on this for a second. I think it's valid.
The difference in your experiences is interesting.
But this is happening very often with me, right? We both talk about how we're mixing or mastering the same song. It feels like I'm actually specifically saying that I feel like I'm mixing the same song because there's this sonic similarity to it that I'm trying to dig in and change. I actually think that there are great songs being made. And I think that in my position and the level that I'm working at the moment, I have access to a lot of new artists that are really trying to discover their voice, and they're engaging me. Maybe multiple reasons. Maybe they can't afford someone more astute than I am, and
they're also not being pushed at those people by people in their camp.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So there's multiple variables about why they're working with me, but that aside, I am hired to help begin their sound, right? And I've done this for artists that are now massive that don't work with me anymore because now they work with Rubin or Spike or someone that has paid their dues and is way above me, and it's totally respectable, and I understand the decision-making process. I do wish that they stayed working with me to a degree.
The story is not over.
Yeah, exactly. But I take a large and strong responsibility in trying to define their voice, and I actually think a lot of them have it. I do. I think there's a lot in the way of it. So I don't fully agree completely with.
It's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing to hear all of that. I mean, I can just feel the frustration of hearing this great material, and you're sitting down that day to do the best upgrade to that thing you can do.
Yeah.
And there's stuff in your way.
Yeah.
That other engineers did.
Yeah.
That introduced to that signal.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I get it. So
keep going, keep pushing.
No, I do. So
keep going.
Let's imagine, so I've taken the piss heartily and will continue out of the DR score people. And if I could remember their names, I would call them out individually and personally, but I can't. And they don't know my name either, so it doesn't matter.
Pro audio doxing.
They don't know No Name McNo-Name?
They don't. Yeah. who could have predicted that?
Did I just out you?
But
forever?
Yeah,
Glorious.
Apparently
forever
so.
outed.
But let's imagine that there was some universally accepted score that we could put on truly groundbreaking, important, communicative records.
So the Purple Rain score.
Purple Rain, I love it. Hendrix, Aretha Franklin, truly timeless.
Smells Like Teen Spirit.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm not talking about, we're talking about older records. Let's, right up to the present day, and we don't need to color the conversation.
Funk.
It's a stretch for me, but yeah.
No, that'll be remembered in a decade from now, and it will be played at weddings a decade from now. So
it's pretty evergreen.
It's evergreen.
Yeah, I think that song is kind of a pastiche. But anyway,
sure, it is.
But that's the realm we live
that
in.
is, yeah, it is. It's a.
I mean, even Amy
repackaging.
Winehouse, as amazing as she was, and real as she was,
it's a repackaging, but Bruno delivers.
Yes, and I believe him. You're right. You're right. So here we go. So let's imagine there was one number we could put on these tracks, and that there was a theoretical high score of 10. So the ultimate records, the timeless, like whatever consensus we could find, and I'm not talking about music reviewers, I'm talking about just humanity, of records that move the fucking needle, would get a 10. I'm arguing that if the DR people got their way and limiters and clippers were banned, that we would move a lot of songs from a 4.2 to a 4.8.
Sure.
And I don't give a fuck about that. it doesn't matter to me. They're like okay songs that were constrained by too much clipping and limiting, got a little bit more dynamic.
Is narrower than what we were talking about, really.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the loudness thing is not
right.
That's one way in which you can.
But this is
my problem. No, my problem with this argument. My problem with this argument is the success of songs can happen in a wide variety of places, right?
Okay.
So one doesn't have to create Smells Like Teen Spirit to have success as an artist, a musician, a songwriter, a producer, an engineer, right? They don't have to make that, right? Yeah, granted, we're all striving for that level of greatness, and maybe we're not, but we are this.
It was influential,
yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, but
connection
is largely.
It's not
luck.
about sales; it's about connection. It's like
it's luck.
That's what I'm saying. But that's what I'm saying.
Land,
that's what I'm saying. A record can land to 1 million people. It can land to 10 million people. It can land to 150 people.
Sure.
Early and then later be recognized as
yes. So I'm playing a bit into your argument where I agree with you that are we making a 4.2 a 4.8 because it sounds subtly better?
It's like a
that's
very
not
superficial aspect of a very deep problem that John's talking about.
Yeah, I'm just not that narrow focused right now. Like I actually think that there are artists that are determining where they're going to sit in a world of releases and genre. And maybe this isn't the one. Maybe this record that they're making isn't the one that's going to, eject them into the stratosphere. But if they now heard themselves a certain way, then their next record could do that, right? So if all you're doing is opening a richer sonic palette for them to experience, so their next record can have that. I mean, that's a that's a big part.
I'll concede 100% to that. I am, I guess where I'm 100%. I think that
because it sounds like you're advocating for poor engineering. It's like it's the Prince argument. Oh well, Prince's record sounded like Little Red Corvette sounds like shit, but it's one of the best records ever made. I mean, if you play it on a good pair of monitors, it sounds terrible.
I'll let
but
Rory,
I love that record.
I agree. So do I.
But that record wouldn't hold up and stand the test of time now next to a Drake record or next to Travis Scott.
Yeah, you'd have to remix it to fill in the whole.
But is the source material even there? You'd have to add in a different bass line.
Could be.
Speaking of Drake records, that Drake DJ Khaled record that Tidal just suggested to me last night was almost caused me to fucking quit the music business. At some point,
which one?
It's just I can't even. I mean, it's awful. One of the worst things I've ever heard in my life.
Grease.
I've refrained from listening because I feel like I'm going to feel that way from the trusted sources that have told me not to listen. I'm going to play the
intro to it, and you will question everything.
Should we have a way of playing records on this podcast so we can do it and discuss like in real time?
We'll have to paste them down.
There's a way to do it, but it's limited distribution.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. So anyway, you were making a really good and important point, and we're not quite talking past each other, but we are talking about slightly.
Kind of though. John's talking about death by 1,000 cuts on every track, and you're talking about a difference in loudness in the ultimate master. It's really
it
doesn't feel like an equivalent.
It doesn't. And I'm with you that ultimately we don't know what it is that holds a 4.2. We're going to talk about this mythical score, right? So what did we say? It was out of 10. So we don't know what holds
out of 14 point. What, Michael?
Fuck those guys.
DR is 14 plus.
Yeah.
14 plus.
Yeah.
Our metric goes to 10.
Yeah. So our ultimate record metric, whatever, we don't know what's holding a 4.2 back from being an 8.5, right? And we were with an engineer yesterday, Rob Bissell.
Rob Bissell, yeah.
Great dude. Shout out to Rob. And we were at his house, and on the way down, Rob was like, coffee is on, guys, and we're working on the acoustics of his room. And when we got there, this coffee became kind of a way of sort of focusing on what matters. And we kept coming back to the fact that Rob understands that the coffee matters more to the session than the plug-in on the snare. You know what I mean?
I completely agree with that.
We were talking about his concept of his room and where he's come from. He's worked a bunch of Shangri-La and what matters about Shangri-La and what doesn't. So like Rick's beard doesn't make the records better, but Rick's meditation practice might, right?
Right.
The space that being in Malibu gives you matters. But if you have that much space in Bel Air, would you get good record? Like, you know what I mean? It's like, it's a way
It's the distance from Hollywood.
Yeah.
Relevant.
The air
like,
quality.
there's-
All the variables.
And those are all Rick's choices.
the
right?
real distance and the perceived distance. You can be in fucking Idaho on your cell phone connected to Hollywood more viscerally than you are in Malibu. But Rick is going to put his hand on your shoulder and say, brother,
Right.
put down the cell phone, right? So my point is that the mechanism, we don't know with, and like we often talk about with diet and exercise and physiology, how, talking the conversation we had at dinner about how your body responds to a certain medication or a certain diet or a certain exercise regime. We don't know how a certain artist will respond to a certain context. And we don't know that negging from some producer isn't the thing that's holding back a certain artist.
And this seems like is it a different problem or is it the same one somehow? Because you're talking about the quality of the engineering taking place.
I'm getting there.
Okay, because I'm looking too.
So here's my point, that in my world, I see these guys, the Dior people, why I'm so annoyed with them is that they sort of paint this simplistic picture of if we could just get rid of clippers and limiters, if all records could be dynamic, everything would be fine.
Yeah,
that's absurd.
I'm saying the problems in the modern music business are much more entrenched, much deeper. And you're talking about the real problems you're seeing.
Yeah, I didn't even know that existed.
Exactly.
I don't want to know it exists. I'm going to unlearn that from this conversation.
It's absurd and wrong.
Especially because of what Michael just dug up.
And our whole...
They got it all wrong.
Yeah. Fuck those guys.
Yeah.
Let me say that again. Our whole aesthetic as a group of people moving through this music business is to try and unlock ability and potential in people at every level. Yeah. So it's like, listen, there are people for whom we could swap their UA interface for a dope interface X, and the outcome would be entirely the same. There are other people for whom that's meaningful.
Sure.
There are people, who we could give a different diet to, an exercise regime and sleep schedule, and it would make a massive difference to their output, and other people for whom it would have no effect.
Yeah. It happened,
we were talking about at dinner about Kanye. Does Kanye need, minimum phase EQ over linear phase EQ?
No.
Or no, he needs something else, right? But is there a situation where the right EQ or the wrong EQ has an impact on the sound of a record and the emotional connection? Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
So your point is 100%. I agree with it 100%. There, all of this matters. We can't pick one metric and make it the one that sort of we obsess about.
I want to round it out.
Okay, do it.
Then I want to pivot. But I have this example, and I said it, I talked about it on Live with Matt Rad yesterday. I just got this new car. I got this Tesla, and the sound system is fantastic. I have a playlist, which is mostly hip hop. Everything sounds great. The minute sicko mode comes on, I have to turn my treble down, my tweeters down in the car, 6 dB, for it to feel like the others. There are other hit records on that playlist, right? The whole playlist is hit records. Like, I made it for a Halloween party last year, and like it was just a bunch of trap records, a bunch of hip hop, high energy records, just to keep you up and wanting to party and all the right things, right? So all those markers are being hit with all these songs, and sicko mode comes on, and you just can't like hear anything. It just hurts. It's disruptive completely, and not in a positive way. So that's an example of that record doesn't need to sound the way it does in a certain range, in a certain density that could be changed, and you would still get, I would argue, the same exact feeling from it, if not more of a visceral feeling from it. Because I'd wonder like in actual feedback from people, how many people have to turn that down a couple of clicks compared to Amigos record, Bad and Bougie, that comes on like next to it, and like similar tempo, similar arrangement, a Ray Shremmerd record, like all these records, these Drake records that are coming on other than that one, like they all kind of exist in the same or a similar place. That one steps out. It's a great record. I guess what I'm arguing is that I want to challenge the world to perceive records just a little bit differently than they think that it has to be.
I think they have to imagine a monitoring situation that they don't have.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, that's our job.
And I'm
that's
wondering,
the engineer's job.
And I'm wondering if Rory can comment on what is the distortion that the sort of average listener is hearing. What can we talk about average? Like, let's just say the previous generation of AirPods.
Okay. Before that, because I feel like
Tesla PMCs and AirPods is a pretty elevated level of monitoring, so you can hear these differences more. That's all I'm saying.
You can hear it in a Honda Civic too. I mean, I've heard this in every Uber that I've been in.
But
I'm just specifically
is it
talking
as easily disciernable for people who aren't monitoring in this way?
Yeah, AirPods for sure. We're just gonna take a step back for a second. I feel like Michael hasn't said much, and I want to. When we're talking about the listener here, I would like to. I've been wanting to find a way to engage you into here because we've gotten so technical. Which honestly, it feels good to do because I think a lot of people listening to this podcast will probably want to hear us talk a little bit about it. It's going to be a rarity, to be honest.
I know
like
at some point.
I'm going to be more prepared and less buzzed next time we
No.
do.
I think this is the best way for us to do it. I think
We
we
should
should
open
be
the floodgates
We
a
should
little
be
bit.
ill prepared and more buzzed for these conversations, so we don't exist as the DR people.
Yeah.
Is that what it was? RC people, DR.
Yeah.
I can't even remember because it's irrelevant.
I don't think we've been too narrow.
I don't think so either.
Yeah.
I don't think so either. But
Yeah.
when we're
I was
talking about
sufficiently bored, which means you guys did a great job.
That cuts.
No, it was great.
Yeah,
No,
says the really good engineer.
I
doing
know.
recordings at home.
I know.
I know.
I know.
It's so big.
It sounds
Like,
big. But that's what I want to know from the perspective at the room that doesn't do this for a living. Do you feel a difference when you're listening to these different kinds of records? Like, do you feel when something's a little bit too pushed, a little too loud, a little less dynamic, and you're craving more of it?
I think a lot of this has to do with the vocabulary in my head versus an average listener, like something like my sister, maybe. If she heard the song versus me, there's already vocabulary that I have that she doesn't. And because of that, I could hear it, or there's a possibility I could hear it. I think I'm still in the place, and I've kept myself in this place where I'm still connecting emotionally over technically.
Yeah.
So I don't hear it as often on AirPods or something like that, but I definitely can hear significantly better mixes over others. Like I'm not listening for it, which I think is different than everyone else at the table. Like you're in a way listening for it because it helps you improve your craft, and it's such an area of focus.
we can focus on it, but
Right.
we can also not.
I'm trying not to.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm trying
Yeah.
not to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something I actively work
But the
towards.
ability to focus on it is there.
When you send
Right,
me, let's
right.
just double
Yeah,
down on
yeah.
you for a second. When you're the one at the table in different group threads to send records. I never send someone a record to
Right.
listen to. I send a podcast,
Yeah.
which we also do. You always send the new release. When you send me, like as my friend, you send me a record to listen to, I'm not listening to the mix. I'm listening to it as I think you're going to hear it.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what I do when I'm mixing a record too, is how your sister is going to
You
listen
want
to
to
it.
share what he likes about
Yeah,
it.
but what I think the dilemma at the table is, and the meat of this conversation is, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I and the alike of me are supposed to know better on how your sister could feel
Absolutely,
from
yeah.
this. Right. So that's why I'm asking if you,
Right.
and I know, I mean, you're kind of a bad example because you are
Yeah.
around the vocabulary.
I'm somewhere, in between
Yeah.
these worlds, which is interesting.
But you
Very
always listen as a fan. You're
Yeah.
always sending me. You're never saying,
100%.
"Yo, listen to the snare
Yeah.
drum." You're like,
Yeah.
"Yo, check out this record." And I love that. I love that. I need that in my life.
Yeah, it's more on a cultural significance level.
Right.
Yeah.
Emotional influence I mean,
Yeah.
that said, there are times where like the record just feels so clear and clean to me that I'm like, I'm hearing everything that they wanted me to hear and there's nothing in the way. Or it sounds
You're feeling everything they wanted
Deeply,
you to feel.
like a deep and immediate connection.
And I think the mix plays a role in that. That's the same way, like, I mean, even like visual design plays a role in the overall communication of something. Like it plays a role, but like if what you're saying doesn't make any sense, then like it could be the most beautiful thing that says nothing. And then, you know, so it's like they all like they're all so important for each other.
But a feeling could say something.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's one of the right.
And the lyric not say it.
Absolutely. Or both. I'm saying I was just comparing two factors of design. Sure. If we're comparing two factors of music, we could say lyric and mix. And like they all have a equal role, but for you, and the more advanced you get, I feel like they have more of an equal importance. Whereas the listener who doesn't even know what a mix is, it might have a 1 to 10% level of importance, and the rest is all other stuff. Maybe it's just the lyrics. I know for my sister, she'll be like, "The song's amazing," and I'm like, "Oh, what do you like about it?" Like, I love this one line, and that's like 90% of the song is one line. And I'm like, "Well, the beat sounds terrible. Like, there's no good melody. Doesn't matter." It's
that's
like
also the easiest thing to remember. And and there's all kinds of stuff happening with music, like at multiple levels. So we can say we like things for certain reasons, but we know that there's more to that story.
So,
which as producers and mixers, we're supposed to
know the story.
Sense of,
yeah,
we're supposed to have a sense of what it means culturally.
I remember reading this engineer Mike Shipley, who's dead now, talking about working with Mutt Lange and this ability. You know, Mutt Lange is famously, you know, he did Back in Black and a whole bunch of Def Leppard.
I mean,
crazy.
Man, I Feel Like a Woman.
Yeah, you know. The Shania Twain records they crushed. I mean, whether you believe them or like them or not, they crushed as productions. 250 million records.
There's
so like,
the Cores, he did the Cores.
The Cores, yeah.
He did some really great singles.
So Mutt Lange is clearly a serious dude, and he's there's like 2 photos of him ever on the internet. Nobody knows anything about him or how he works. He's never done interviews. So this interviewer was asking Mike Shipley at the time, kind of like, you know, what's the deal with Mutt Lange? Like, why is he so good? What's his trick? You know, give us the one neat thing we should know about Mutt Lange. And Shipley's response was along the lines of that. You know, he's worked with a lot of producers, but he never met anyone with Mutt Lange's ability to. So they were something that I read about at the time, which seemed kind of crazy, but of course now in modern production techniques isn't. Was that they were using an automated? They had an SSL console with an EQ. You could automate the EQ moves, not a digital console. It was an analog console that you could automate the EQ. Sure. And
you mean automate it?
Yeah, automate the actual EQ moves.
It would move.
It would move at least, maybe not the physical knob, but the EQ would change.
Yeah, of course.
So they were on that Shania record.
Remember the Recall?
Yeah, Recall. No, more than Recall.
Something more than. Oh,
so
wow.
they were automating the EQ syllable by syllable on Shania Twain's vocals, bringing out the diction in the words and the you know.
Sure.
And they did a country record, a pop record, and a world version of those albums.
Yeah.
And they automated the EQ differently for, you know, different audiences. Right?
Yeah.
And he said what impressed him most about Mutt Lange was the fact that he could go from that mode of thinking, a little more 4K on the T sound of Tonight, to listening like a checkout girl at Safeway.
Zooming out.
Zooming in, zooming out, zooming in, zooming out.
Agility.
And he said that he had never met anyone who could do that as effortlessly as Mutt Lange.
Objectivity as a producer.
And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, Spider, when we were talking about, and it's a topic for a whole episode, this constant shift we make as engineers between the reality of the record and the imagined space. So I hear a snare sound. No, I'm mastering records. You hear a snare sound, and it is dull and thumpy. And you imagine that in the context of the record, it would be better if it was bright and crunchy. So you make a move, but now you need to step back from the imagined space to the real space. And did you actually land, or are you hearing what you imagined? And this is the kind of...
challenging your bias.
I made an EQ move and I loved it, and then realized the EQ was in bypass, which I did again last night. So this way we have of hearing what we think we did instead of what
ourselves.
We actually did.
Yeah.
And we're constantly moving between these two spaces. I don't know how that relates to your points, Michael. Sorry. Checkout girl. That's what I was getting
That's me.
at. Is the idea of
You're the checkout girl?
Zoom out.
Close enough.
This idea of
I was
being
a
able to
checkout boy.
listen. You want to be able to go from listening like the everyman to getting in there and deploying the tools and doing what you need to do to make the record more effective.
Get the details right. If
The details
necessary,
right, yeah,
and
yeah.
still be able to zoom right out.
That's going back. That's my conundrum here. I actually think the takeout boy and girl would be open to something sounding, I hate saying it because you brought up this hatred towards the word dynamic and saturation, but something that's more dynamic.
Yeah.
I think that we've boxed ourselves into this everything needs to be loud conversation because of access to limiters and a lack of understanding on how they actually work. I'm a proponent and a believer that Checkout Girl is going to be down with a more dynamic mix and a quieter mix because it's what Spotify wants us to do.
There's
Still
no question.
thinking about the teenager.
1 second, just to clarify, we're not boxed in at all. We should.
Well, we are.
No, I mean, no,
I am by a rough mix almost every day.
Yeah, sorry.
Right.
In our conversation, sorry.
Yeah.
I mean,
but
to
I'm
say
saying
that
in real life,
the
in
idea-
our work life.
in the real life, we're constrained by kind of a belief that louder drives engagement.
Yes.
And we all,
that's ad language.
We know
that's
at
not
this
real life.
Exactly. We know at this
I
table.
don't know. I mean, Michael and I are dealing with this concept of loudness. So when we're looking at our marketing materials, we're thinking in terms of stages, right? So if you put an image on a Instagram story that is sort of loud, it gets your attention, right? It attracts you. And once you have someone's attention, you can then engage them with ideas, and then you can drive them to, sign up for the newsletter or do whatever, right? So what does an attractive image look like, right? To me, this sort of seems like what this music does. It like attracts attention through this urgency.
It can.
Yeah.
A yellow poster can be loud and dynamic at the same time. It could be a muted yellow. It's still yellow.
I agree. Totally.
Right?
Yes.
So a sound, you can have a trumpet that is brash and trumpety, like for lack of better words, engage your attention. A big horn line that is muted and warm, but it's a fucking trumpet. It's still gonna grab your attention. It's a fanfare. It's a Motown horn line that sounds warm and engaging, right? So it can be both of those things. So I don't know if that's an argument for it still needing to be loud numerically.
No, it's just a comment about purpose.
I know. I
why
love
these
that.
things,
I love thinking about a visual in a design as being loud. But when I see a loud design, there's a white or a black in the background that lets you engage further into it in depth, and that's dynamics, right? So you're
And sometimes, if there are 10 posters on a wall and 9 of them are yellow and yours is not, it's less loud. It's going to stand out. If yours is a muted gray, it's going to be.
Look, checkerboards are like your eyes. If there's a checkerboard in your peripheral vision, your eye will go to it because it's full on against full off.
Yes.
And that high contrast thing gets your attention.
Isn't that one of the drivers of Billie Eilish's the success of that record is just the contrast between it and the landscape?
I would
musically?
think so.
And we're meeting
Sure.
Rob at the weekend, right? And
It's a clear alternative.
It was sonically, texturally, the space in that record. There was. Let's imagine they had the same amount of energy to deploy. They all had to hit 0 dB.
Sure.
Where they put that energy, all the low
Exactly.
end.
Right.
They made choices to
evoke.
darker tones, more spacious mixes and arrangements, and because of it, a record that was less loud,
Yes.
in air quotes,
Penetrated
less
more
bright,
deeply.
connected, and stood out more from a noisy, loud, brash yellow landscape.
Yes,
sure.
it's a great example.
So
It sounded more like an isolated life where you're at home.
yeah,
It
was a
feels
beautiful
like a like a
synergy
bedroom.
between
Feels
the
authentic,
sonics and
yeah.
the
Feels
and
like
the,
a
and the
bedroom
arc.
rather than a huge club or some,
So I don't think we disagree at all.
No.
I think where I want to sort of close out on it. But I think that there's so much to where I really struggle with the loudness wars as someone who, you know, is a mastering engineer, who really cares, who really sweats the difference between -10 LUFS and -9 and the trade-offs.
Part of your job,
It's one of the biggest parts of my job, whether I like it or not.
Yeah.
And how to get there. It's like, how do I get to where the client wants, needs, whatever, with the minimum damage or destruction or whatever, or maybe we can even use it to drive emotional impact. You know, there are records that sound better at -8 than they did at -10.
Yeah.
And knowing when that happens, when should I lean entirely on the clipper and totally hit the snares and the kicks hard because it drives the energy of the song, right? So what I hate is the way that level has become sort of a shorthand for like good, and loud is bad and dynamic is good, and it's clearly not the case. And where you're...
Well, it's a reaction to loudness.
Exactly.
Obviously.
And where you're rightly pulling the conversation. But we need
a reaction to loudness. It's just the pendulum swing too far.
To triple diss these guys, they can't make good dynamic records that I care about. You know what I mean? These same people who are all bent out of shape about how loud records are.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the Dior crowd.
No, I know. I didn't even. I didn't know that existed.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's a movement against. So ultimately, I think we're on the same page, and the artful engineering and how it can support communicating a message. You know, you'll hear no argument from me on that.
Yeah, the amount of times I hear a beautiful, emotional vocal coming through my speakers that sounds like they've recorded it up against a mic like this, and the minute I take all that low mid out so you can get some clarity on the lyric, the feeling's all gone and it sounds thin. It's just like that's I guess what I'm kind of getting at is reinvigorating the engineer community to understand what that mic technique means and how it's gonna matter later, and when the artist is pushing back against you, like actually maybe figuring out a polite way of asserting yourself that like this actually needs to happen. And you know, do you think that when Michael Jackson was recording and Bruce Swedian said, "Hey, can you back up from the mic?" Michael's like, "No." It's like, no. Michael's like, "Okay, cool. Like, let me do it." You know,
that was a great MJ impersonation there.
Oh my god, that was so reflexive. I didn't even. I mean, I imagine him not giving pushback, right? Because he wants the best for the product. So the minute someone is pushing back against the engineer for asking them to step back from the mic, "Oh, I can't hear myself." I get into this all the time. It's like, well, mess with the headphone mix. Like something's wrong, right? So that's an easy example for most people to understand, which is you sound too close to the mic. You should sound close to the mic so you're in my ear, but that doesn't mean get close to the mic. That's a different conversation.
We're looking for emotional closeness. We're looking for connectedness.
Yes.
Not necessarily your lips touching the capsule.
Yes. And that involves space. The way we feel intimacy is hearing and feeling us in occupying a space. When you're that close to the capsule, you can't feel or hear any space. So these arguments are important to discern from loudness.
Singers could use guidance
on
how to get people to sit on the edge of their seat and just be on the edge of every syllable. Like,
we were joking about parenting being a war zone, you know, and Sydney and I were overacting it before I left the house, you know, just being funny about people who don't have kids versus people who have kids, and just the sort of exaggerating what parenting is and isn't. But something that to tie it to the current conversation, there is a lot of the music business and the record making business right now, the pace of it, the competition, the stress of it, the sort of drive towards product is very strong. And I think a lot of people feel like they don't have the space to take the time to coach an artist or build a relationship. It's kind of commodity production line. I mean, when I hear about, you know, we talked about one night here at the conversation about sort of, we were talking about engineering, something came up, and one of the engineers, whose name I've forgotten, who does a lot of rap work, was kind of like, more or less saying like, you guys are like sort of living in a different world to the world I live in, which is a war zone, Max. And he was kind of evoking, downtown Fallujah in fucking the middle of the war, It was like his run and gun, like, we've got to capture this. Everything is on fire. The plane lands and the artist goes here. Everything is
the important distinction here is that if you talk to him outside of that circumstance, he wants to take time to step back and say, this is what it should sound like or could sound like, right? That's important. Like the people that discuss that heated moment of having to do that, having to capture that, then we still need to acknowledge there needs to be time to reflect
wartime photographers? They could have used an additional moment to get that angle or whatever. I mean,
so you're making a really important point. It's not to imply that any or many or all of these people don't care.
I'm really sensitive to that.
You made it. You caught me because I knew that and meant it about Max, but it wasn't clear in the way I was communicating. Sure. So you're making a really important point.
He still wants his rune to be treated right so he can bring his stuff back. And this is important.
And there, I remember talking to a producer. We talked about at dinner about recording the A-list of A-list rappers in the most, I can't really say the names, but it was like, moving from studios to crazy, 7-star hotels, rented, super bougie Airbnbs, and this artist not wanting to ever record in a studio again, and basically, trying to record vocals in entirely glass rooms and on balconies and crazy hotel suites. And this person was deeply passionate about getting better recordings of great performances, knowing that the view, over some lake in Italy was inspirational to the artist, but realizing that someone's got to mix this before we can make a record.
This is interesting as to whose responsibility does this fall under. In a way, it sounds like a traditional producer's role to make sure that the conditions for that are acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it the engineer's role to say, hey, this isn't working on an engineering level?
Yeah, like what can we do to improve this? Yeah, but also maintain vibe.
Of course.
Yes.
Of course. It's a negotiation.
But this is to imagine that there's some kind of...
There's no absolute here. That's a big part.
I have mastering clients who will ask me to do something and it's like, yes, sir. How high? Done. And other people that I have long-term relationships and I can say, you sure you want track 10 on the record? Like, can you imagine going that far as a mastering engineer, someone you have that much trust with, where you're like,
of course,
you're finishing the record.
Yeah, I've done it.
I think. But I mean, so that's the continuum of people who would say, can we add 7 dB of brightness to track 7? Yes, sir. Sure. I already did my first pass. You want that on the revision, and you're clear about what you want?
Sir.
Yes, sir. Done. To people, I would say you should consider dropping.
I think it's a commentary on the sort of decline of the traditional producer's role. Like as in the sense of determining the conditions under which that vocal recording is happening. It's kind of like I'm just noting that was overseen by someone in the past and now it sort of isn't. And it's more shoot from the hip. And so that sort of guerrilla engineering is like a newer phenomenon in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it wasn't happening. I mean, Jeff Lynne was doing all these recordings at home, like doing everything himself, and
it's just more commonplace at the moment.
Just something to consider and to weigh differently, I think now.
It would be interesting to have an engineer that is, I mean, despite the global pandemic at the moment, but that actually does this and have them on to discuss what it's like in those conditions. I like thinking about the all glass window room. Seems pretty relevant right now. Like people
Dennis
trying to go to the beach.
Koziak's been all over the world recording vocals. He's had some pretty interesting stories.
Yeah, he's in a lot of hotel rooms, and he's out in Malibu right now. and he sent me a picture of the rig, and it's in a bedroom, and that's where they're working.
Yeah.
And I mean that's clearly a thing. It's hard for us to speak much to it because we don't do it. I have my space,
But you have to mix it.
I know it's funny. It's funny actually. If to talk about that, I don't think about that. I don't really ever.
But you do influence people upstream.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's one of the things value you've brought to your relationships.
Yeah, if I hear too much room in a vocal, I just think to myself, oh, it's recorded in a hotel room. Like, let's move on. Let's make it sound as good as it can be.
Yes.
It's very rare
It's too
that
late
I think,
by the time you're mixing it.
yeah, it's
I mean,
too
come
late,
on.
and it doesn't affect me. Like I can imagine an engineer listening to this and thinking, damn, I wish it wasn't recorded with that room and the 700 hertz resonant frequency in this thing. And it's like, well, it is. So let's figure out how to handle it.
That's a kind of a bringing of their ego to the project. I struggle with that.
Yeah,
kind of like, this project isn't, we talked about it in one of the other episodes. This doesn't sound as good as I want it to sound. And really, it's like, I'm making it about me.
Yeah.
It's like, if I show up and do the best work that I can, sort of integrating the client's goals and how it will translate in the world and making it loud enough, but not too, whatever. If I do my best job, then that's it. It's done. It doesn't, I don't have to worry about who hears it and thinks, oh, Rory mastered that? Oh,
Yeah.
It's like...
That face.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's fucking life. That life.
Yeah.
There was something that came up before, just speaking about context. It's a word that keeps popping in my head every time I hear these discussions. And I feel like I'm always looking for overlaps between designer and engineer.
Yeah.
Or music engineer, audio engineer, not necessarily software engineers, but the overlap there too. And I think context is what is shared across, or rather a skill set that should be shared across disciplines on a project. I think that is like, if there's anything that should be shared, it's an understanding of context for the thing you're making, where it's going to be, who's going to see it, how they might react, and developing an understanding for what that is. I think that's sort of that alignment piece.
Yeah.
I personally believe that. I don't think it may or may not work for people. I think that's where I've found the most, really don't want to say this word, the most synergy. I was like, shit, I need to find another word really quick.
Use those words.
I'm just imagining Alex Goose across the table when I said the word synergy. Oh, I'm going to text him and tell him I said that tonight.
The goose is loose.
It's where this common understanding can be found. Synergy. So
No, I'm following you.
yeah, and I'm just, as I'm listening to these conversations, and there's a board on Trello I have of a quote unquote career ladder, what it looks like for an engineer, what skill sets they should kind of lean into and outside of choosing the right compressor or whatever. And I think context and cultural and contextual awareness is super important.
Yeah, that's huge. Thanks.
I think that's what makes you, or a piece. It's not everything, but it's definitely a piece of what makes
it's a big
you.
piece. It's a
yeah.
big piece.
Yeah. What is the context? So a project comes in, you learn about the artist, what their sort of thing is. Say it's somebody new that you don't know about. Like, what's that process like of discovering what they're about? So you know sort of how to act in their as their representative in the mix process.
Yeah, I mean, I have a pretty current example of that, and
Cool.
on specifically talking about context and what Michael's just bringing up. I mean, this new artist that I'm working on from the UK, it almost feels like a foreign language to me, even though it's English. I honestly don't know the lyrics, but it's a feeling to me. It sounds like Nicki Minaj meets Skepta, and it's super tight. She's so sick, but to me, it's an energy. It's a feeling. I need it. I want it to sound clean enough and transparent enough to knock so there's enough low end, but I want the vocals to drive the record, right? I think last week we talked about something ahead of the beat, And when I aligned it to a grid and I added a clap in a section that didn't have a clap just to hear where the beat was, like it didn't feel right. It didn't bring the energy. And we talked about this. And it's my job to understand that right doesn't mean right. And every case is different. It depends on so much. And you're bringing up context is me understanding who's going to listen to this. Like this is going to be played on the streets in the UK. Like I'm not necessarily sure that the mix is going to elevate it to the right place in general, but I'm trying to do my best job. And thinking about where it landed up now is that it's so much more dynamic than the rough mix was, but the artist recognized it and it hits deeper, right? Like it hits lower. It has a different kind of energy and, real life conversation. Like the rough mix was extremely limited and distorted. So this bass had this upper harmonic that didn't exist in the actual source material, right? Like bass stuff. And I talk about this pretty regularly with Matt Rad on the live. Like when I talk about why I don't like limiters, it's because people are overusing them to bring out character in a sound source that doesn't have what it has in it. So like when I'm listening back and forth from the energy of the rough mix, I have to be really sensitive to, okay, well now it's more dynamic and there's more low end, but the bass doesn't have that mid-range grind and growl to it that it had. So I have to re-inject that. I can't
This thing has a moral dimension in our world. We're thinking, I don't want to do this to the person I'm handing this to.
Yes.
Right? But it's understandable that people aren't thinking that way.
Yes.
They're
And that's
just
okay.
getting the sound that they want.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But if I want to win on all levels and I want to actually have genuine, true sub frequencies, it requires a certain amount of headroom that this rough mix has boxed me into not having based on how much limiting occurred, right? There's just physics at play. Like if it's at a certain loudness level, you can't have a full 30 hertz cycle exposed and delivered to you. And granted, we can go down many rabbit holes here about how a lot of devices won't even reproduce that and the relevance of it. I would argue that you can still feel it. Yeah. And if there's an 808, you should hear it down to its last.
So is that the context that the rough mix represents to your mix process?
Yes, exactly. So the rough mix.
I think I was asking specifically about this sort of identity, like the context of the artist and what they mean.
Yes.
And that's what's that discovery process?
Yes.
Is it in the mix that you discover it, or do you? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No. I mean, it's in the record, right? That you press play on that rough mix, and you have to hear it in that. But I guess what I'm getting into at a more specific level to an engineer that's listening is that if the source material doesn't translate to what that rough mix has represented from the room, from that creation, from that cultural outreach, that connection that they had to that, if the source material doesn't give you that, I'm trying to discuss a way to not avoid that, to not avoid and say, oh, I know better. It's, I know I can get it to a certain place, but this also exists, and they have to coexist.
So to notice things that are wrong, but
wrong is not the right word, right?
But that's what I mean. To notice there are things that are wrong,
can be improved.
To take the extra step to understand why it was appealing.
That's the first step. The first step is, why was it appealing? Why was it signed off on? And then, well, why am I getting my visceral reaction is it's lacking in certain areas? And maybe that's specifically technical down to my monitoring, where I can actually hear that fundamentally it's missing things, right? Yeah.
Sure.
That is my job. But it's more of a visceral reaction to, I don't feel, when that hook drops, I don't feel that low end, like that moment that could be. And that moment of like,
but maybe you felt it on the small ported speakers in some certain room.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or they might not have known that it was possible. They might not have. You might be bringing something new that furthers what they were about.
That's what I'm trying. Exactly.
This is what I'm hearing.
It's both.
I get records that I put up, and it's like, oh, this is bright and mid-rangey and kind of annoying. This is fucked up. I'm going to fix this.
But that bass.
And then I get another record. This is bright. This is mid-ranging. This is annoying. Perfect for the pop punk genre that we're working in, considering where these kids are from, right?
Yeah.
So you can't apply any, which is why sort of these auto mastering things are so absurd because they look at the frequency response and that you can't apply the context, which is what you're driving at, is crucial.
Yeah.
And you've got to weigh sort of what were they trying to do? What did they actually do? What's possible that they didn't know was available to them? How can I take their vision and further it without undermining it, not change the spirit of it?
In an avoidance of being prescriptive here, I think my reaction to what you were saying, which I heard your intent in the question, to take it towards a technical route, because that's kind of where our head's been at in this conversation so far, is I actually think that I have ways of re-achieving that that distortion or that mid-range or that lack of tone that comes when you also attempt to get more of what you're feeling as like the engineer or the producer who's missing something from it.
This is great.
I actually think like I have a way to access both, and it's very specific into understanding context. So
and it's pretty technical.
Let me
it's
close
very technical.
Let me close a loop before the Burgundy robs
Please.
the thought.
Please.
I love this because this is you've sort of arrived, you've tumbled to the point where
So much tumbling.
where you've tumbled to where I stumbled earlier, which is the idea that these guys have, that if we could just make these records quieter, the DR people. So the idea that if we could just turn it down, that it would get better. And what you're saying is, it ties into that, which is this kind of, this space of imagining kind of what's possible. And
Yes.
and
Always.
yeah, and I love that, I love that the meeting of those kind of two worlds. I think so often people view their work, this is the point I was trying to make, people come to their work and they're like, if they hadn't done that, I would be able to do this. So, they've distorted the vocals, now I can't make it sound good. Toy goes out of pram and engineer has minor hissy fit, gets to go to lunch with their friends and bitch about how another dumb artist or producer or engineer fucked up a record.
Right.
And there's some kind of, this is supposed to be useful, right?
Yeah, this is not what we're trying to do.
And what you're talking about is this idea of kind of accepting the choices people made and pushing towards a higher goal, a better outcome, a deeper outcome, a more complete expression of that original intention.
Yes.
And
that is also entirely useful to you.
Oh man.
Well, yeah.
Completely.
It gets you another step further.
It's a
in your whole thing.
completely different level of ear training. It's like Juilliard level ear training of being able to transcribe a song by ear by memory, and it's that level when it comes to frequency spectrum, distortion, all of the things that
intent.
The intent, the intent is ingrained, right? So the intent, that's a different thing. That's a different dimension of this. I'm talking about understanding of the technical tools, like the actual access, the reference, the mastery, and the reference. Exactly. And
you are the reference.
And to because you know better, you don't do this because you're saying, "Oh, I can do this." It's like I only listen to the rough mix once and I understand it, and that like, wait, what are you talking about? Like you have to constantly be referencing what the intention was and understand it, because you're actually kind of playing a game of charades with the record, and you're like, "Oh, you did this, but this is actually what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do a different version of that that's a bit more clear of what you were trying to do because I think I'm better at this game than you are." And
but so how does it relate?
But
always.
Exactly.
Always.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You already described to me that you're a giraffe. I'm just extending my neck out higher to show you that I'm actually a giraffe.
Or there's a different way of putting your head that high. We don't need
That's what I mean.
We don't need a long neck. There's another way of getting that elevated
It's
view,
a decoding.
right?
It's,
so
yes.
that's the point that I was clumsily making, is I see so often people come up against a technical limitation of a mix or a production or a master, and they say, well, they've done this and now my hands are tied. And in the modern, you've described this about Dale very often, Dale Becker, that he loves and thrives on this small space that mixers, if any, this crawl space that mixers leave him to craft records you can listen to, right? And
he's so good at it.
Yeah, he really is.
He's so good at it.
And I think that's crucial, is what you're saying. I see a kind of a defeatist attitude in this Dior stuff, and in this this sort of dogmatic approach to making records.
Cynicism.
And the reality is, we talked about, I listened to one of our previous episodes the other day, and I was making a case that we're still collectively, the four of us, fired up about music, fired up about record making, fired up about the challenges, aware of some of the really absurd, fucked up stuff that's happening in the music business, but still, like, driving down here tonight, I was listening to a record by an artist called Henry Jameson, called Gloria Duplex, and it's just fucking an amazing record, a songwriter record, produced by a producer in New York called Dove Man, and amazing record, deep record. And I was waving my hand and missing green lights, and getting honked at because I was in the record coming down the 110.
Hope you were safe.
I was barely safe, honestly, but.
We'll talk about this later.
Yeah, my point is that we're passionate about this, and I hate the kind of defeatist attitude that comes from. There are people who sort of would say that they love music, but they're not prepared to get in the fucking in the muck and make records in the modern.
Yes.
It's like, if you love music, then fight for the artists you're talking about. And I realize that I'm kind of almost arguing against myself with my 4.2, 4.8 dichotomy earlier.
Yeah, sure.
But if you love music, you've got to find ways to make it work, make it loud enough. And like you, the hope for me is that when I compare a mix to client ref, client ref mix to my master, that I'm deeper, taller, wider if it's appropriate, louder, more perceptually dynamic, but actually hitting the numbers that we need to hit.
Yes, exactly.
And whatever that is, it's different for everyone.
Yes.
That feeling of like, I took their idea and opened it up. It's better in most ways.
Yes.
And if I made a trade-off,
but it's like better of what their intent was.
Yeah, better expression, exactly.
That's huge. I mean, that's what, going back to Michael and talking about just simply using the word context, it just got me riled up. I tried to go on this tangent on ear training. I mean, I might be preaching to the choir here with all engineers listening to me, but I can tell when a bass is being distorted between 200 and 500 hertz. Like I know the area, like that's my job. I'm supposed to know that fundamental that region of, I guess that's second and third order harmonic.
The whole frequency range is your domain.
It's my domain. Exactly. I was supposed to know this, right? Yeah. So I'm supposed to also know where this is coming from if it's not in the source material when I solo that sound, to make sure it's not there. So to give up, that's my point, is when I'm talking about in inducing dynamics to a mix that is, or a song, a record that is too loud, it's not that it shouldn't feel that loud. It's specifically on how to reorient that band, that wide band frequency spectrum, to give a visceral feeling and a belly reaction, a full body reaction, while maintaining that energy that was already there. I'm supposed to know the quote unquote best way to do that.
Redistribute the energy.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Constantly. And I think I talked about this in the first episode, or I talked about it on Matt Rad Live. I'm getting them kind of confused when I bring things up. But I think about the entire record as a full 88 key piano, right? And we're trying to balance the hands for most of the time and have that right hand or left hand jump out at you at different parts. But overall of the record, that full bandwidth should be transferable in some way. You should be able to experience all of it. So a lot of records in top 40 to me or in pop are heavily weighted in the right hand and bright and exciting. And maybe you think, I think about trap in that way, and I think about hip hop in that way. And when I hear a trap record existing mostly in the right hand, I'm like, wait, but there's an 808 in your record. Why isn't the left hand up? Like I try to balance these things constantly. That's what I think of every time I hear a record.
It seems like upstream monitoring issues. And that's
Yes.
like you're redistributing the energy to make up for the fact that the monitoring was sort of limited in some way.
Yes. I do think that's the case most of the time. And I think that's why I have less of a defeatist mentality towards things. I'm like, oh, he must have not heard it. She must have not heard that
because
mid-range.
they were responding to something.
So that's my
the whole
job.
thing.
My job is to fill in that hole, right? But the deeper issue sometimes is the hole is filled up by bad protocol, like just like relying on a limiter or a distortion plugin on the mix bus that is now giving the bass this growl that it didn't have. And that's the one I keep coming back to because it's an easy example. This happens all the time. There's a mid-range growl of a bass or an 808 that doesn't actually exist in the wave form of that thing. Like it's a very common mix thing. It's less in a guitar. A guitar is pretty much full range most of the time. Like there's certain, a bass is not inherently full range when you're using a synthesizer, right?
Well, yeah. In my world, it's and we may have mentioned this one of the other weeks. It's very simple. I get 2 mixes from a client. There's the unlimited mix and the limited mix, and
Still?
Yeah, more often. I mean, not.
I never send an unlimited
They're not
mix. at this
optimized.
point.
You're up. Yeah.
Well,
Because
they're
the
not
limiting is so
optimized.
minimal, it would just change the feeling of it.
I would be happy to master either your limited or unlimited mix. I'm talking about, the stuff that I'm getting, and
Sometimes.
you get, when it's non-label stuff and indie projects and whatever, but you get, the worst case scenario is where you get a limited mix that's crushed and destroyed and crunchy and all the bad things we don't like about limiting and clipping. And then when you go to the unlimited mix, it in no way represents what the artist or the producer approved.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, you're stuck in that middle ground. It's like, I can't work from either of these really to get the result that I think this track could be,
You could ask the producer to send you a version half limited.
Yeah. What I often do is say, just send me the settings.
Communication.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. No, what I often ask for is give me the bus settings. What did you have on the bus? Oh, I had standard clip and L2, Pro L2. Okay, great.
So
and
it
then
makes me laugh every time. Sorry, keep going.
L2. I had to check myself.
No.
Today.
Just
I was
the idea
wait,
that
it's not L2.
I love when producers say, "Oh, there's not much on the mix bus, and there's an OTT from Ableton on it." Like, if everyone will know what I'm talking about. That's listening.
No, I told you about the client that I asked. I had.
Oh, you're not doing very much because you have one plugin on it. That plugin is AI of all AIs. Like, there's nothing that makes sense about that plugin.
The thermonuclear option. I asked a client once. I had this problem where unlimited and limited were both problematic, and I asked them for a picture of what was on the mix bus, and I got a video back, and it was a
you got 30 pictures per second.
An MTV Cribs style walkthrough of the mix bus. I want that so bad.
I'm not joking. I will, and this was very well intentioned, guy.
Maybe every plugin parameter.
Over here we got the Osode. It's gotta
justify every.
Dude, you're joking. There was probably, from memory, there was maybe 15 plugins on the bus. There was multiple EQs, multiple limiters, multiple clippers, multiple multi-bands.
Yeah.
And now the same guy is sending me, we worked through this phase. He was a client that I poached from Sterling. We've worked through this phase, and I'm saying, I think you should consider backing off here. I think when you want to make things wide, put it on the synth only on the bus. When you want to clip, let's clip the drum bus, but leave the main. Now he's got one plugin on his master, and when he takes it off, the mix sounds like the mix. It's like it sounds like a little bit less loud and a little bit less wide.
Yeah,
he's using a BX whatever, master.
Tell him
optimizer.
Take that off.
Sure, I work from the non BX version.
Yeah.
But my point is that he was literally doing 15, 16, 17 plugins on his master bus, and we were ending up in a situation where neither was what we wanted.
Yeah.
And
that's interesting that he can hear that his version is not where he wants it, but neither is yours. That's interesting because I feel like more common than not, it's we actually already liked how it was, but this versus you both know it hasn't been nailed yet, and there's something in the middle that's disrupting that possibility. That's really interesting.
You're building towards.
That's cool.
Well, you hope over the multiple projects that you can show people what's possible, but you need the raw material. If the unlimited mix doesn't represent the mix and the limited mix is destroyed because of over processing, you haven't got anything to show the potential of their song.
Yeah, this is one of those cool moments where I imagine like the 21-year-old version of myself, like having the opportunity to hear this conversation and like what I would think. And I think what I'd be thinking is that if I'm doing too much to the mix bus, like my standard for what is too much on the mix bus should be way higher than like for an individual track. Like to do a move on the mix bus is significant. So if I'm doing a lot, I've got other problems and they're not the mix bus.
Yes.
So I'm starting to, as a young engineer trying to feel this out, right? Trying to develop that emotional relationship with your moves. Like I'm thinking about being skeptical of when there's too much processing happening and to just step back for a second, maybe. Maybe it's the answer, but I mean, most of the time it probably isn't.
More often than not, it's not. Yeah. And there, I think in mixing, which is not my world, but there's a place for all sorts of heavy colors and processes. But if they go across the mix bus, you lose that contrast. If everything is colored red, then kind of nothing is red. You know what I mean? It's like you can clip the drum bus and make the synth bus wide and make the vocal bus dry, and you get these interesting contrasts. But if all of that is all on the mix bus, everything gets sort of mashed, Yeah. And I mean it's probably obvious in some ways, but maybe not in other ways, But if you've got to send your mix bus processing as a video rather than a single photo, that's a tell right there.
Well, you have to know that complexity, every layer of complexity is eliminating the ease with which, or the connection to, if you intend to send to a mixer, now all those layers of complexity create opportunities for a problem.
Yes.
So if it's a closed loop and you make everything and that's what it is, then it's kind of, whatever. It kind of doesn't matter. It's when you need to collaborate with other people, there's a sort of
I was actually
understanding between engineers. Something.
I'm relating highly to you discussing the 21-year-old version of you, because the 21-year-old version of myself had 10 the max plugins in Pro Tools on my master fader, and now I have one. Like 13 years since then, like a lot changed, and it's definitely been minimized, right? Even today, before Josh, my assistant Josh DeGuzman came over, we minimized the template even more, and even enough for him to say to me today, dude, your template's barely anything. It's so minimized. And he brought it up. Like it was a specific moment. Let's take this off. We don't need this. I don't even use this. Like the last parallel compression preset that I have in my session that has lasted since Tony mixing, like the last compressor that I sometimes use as a parallel minus 24 dB is gone. Like it's just deleted from the thing. Like there's no compressor.
What's its significance to the outcome?
It's a handicap, and I don't want handicaps, right? So the parallel compressor on the vocal is a handicap towards keeping it dense the whole time. Like I can find a different way to do that without a compressor. I just know I can't. So anyway, I'm just challenging. And Josh even said, hey, I still like to use that. I'm going to make it inactive in yours, but I'm going to have it just in case I want. I said, no, we're using the same template. You don't need that either. Find another way. And we just deleted it, right? Like he wanted to keep it because it's a cheat tool, right? I've been relying on, or maybe not relying, but I have it in my toolkit, new toolkit, right? But what I was thinking about when Rory was talking about the difference of putting something on your mix bus versus a subgroup, right? Like, and being too heavy-handed. I've asked you about this. Like I've been using this new plugin, the Gull Floss thing, right? There's not many new plugins that I can say that I've been using. I kind of keep to the same, and then with some upgrades, like I got the Saturn 2 now. I haven't used Saturn a bit, but that's one of the newest. But the Gull Floss is a whole new technology, right? It's a smart EQ. When I put it on, it does something. I don't know what it's doing, right? I can't really figure out what it's doing, and I'm using it very minimally. Then I decided to go to their website and watch a video and a tutorial on like what it's actually doing. And I read a lot about it. And they say specifically, if you have more than 4 or 5% on each of these parameters on a bus or a mix bus, very specifically on a group or a mix bus, you're probably doing too much, right? I can only hear the plugin work when it's over that number, which means that the problem is probably somewhere else, right? So if I have it on a guitar bus and the only way I get it to sound the way I want is to have it at like a 10%, I know there's a problem somewhere else. So I put it back down to like 2%, which is kind of where my template starts it at. I don't want to get into each parameter on this thing and what it does. It's too deep, but it's active at 2% of whatever the plugin is doing. Who fucking knows what that shit is doing? It's at 2%, but I adjust it little by little until I hear it do something, and then I take it back down, and then I address.
That's how I did every plugin adjustment when I was young.
Right,
Every
exactly.
single one.
It's just so meticulous.
Yeah.
But they stated on their website that if you are using this more than 5%, you're doing too much on a sound source, right? Or there's a problem that's exposed somewhere else that you're not aware of just yet. You're doing something too macro, right? And that has re-educated my brain, since the 21 to the 34. Yes.
Yeah.
Our plugin should only be used to 5% of its capability, right? Like that's crazy. Like Photoshop doesn't say that. It says use all of us. Pro Tools says use all of us. This is saying only use as a 5%. Find your problem elsewhere. But we will make your overall, like it's doing this really musical cutting and boosting thing that's happening. Like it's as you tame a frequency, you're controlling it. Their language is tame versus recover, which is a boost thing. So it's a cut and boost musically, depending on how wide and narrow you want these cuts and boosts to be. But it's what it feels like.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, when it's on a bus, there's a bit more 3-dimension to it. But if you're going too far, you hear artifacts and you hear it actually reducing these things too much. The Spotify effect, I would call it.
I'm really curious about what that means. Like what does it feel like?
It feels like I can which part?
I mean,
when it connects and when it's working, it feels like I can reach into the sound or that group a little bit more. It feels
more vivid, more lifelike.
More lifelike. And if I have to use that plugin to make it feel more lifelike, that means there's a different way to make it feel that way, which is more particular to the sound source. And my whole kind of divergence here has been the conversation of the sound source doesn't have what the rough mix is showing itself to be. And I'm talking about techniques on how to hear that and how to re-achieve it. And this is a tool.
Appreciate it.
Yes, and appreciate it in context and recreate it smartly.
At the
with
track
more control.
And bus level rather than the mix bus level.
Yes, exactly.
That's it. That's the heart of it, is the cynical view, the DR view is they got it wrong, and your view is they're aiming for this. I can get them there a better way.
Yes.
Like they
understanding what they're aiming for.
They implemented it wrong, but their intention was right.
Yes.
Never question the intention.
And over time, I'm going to help them get there directly rather than roundabout.
That's it.
The upstream influence.
The end story with that client who sent me the video of the 17 plugins on the mix bus is that the last 2 projects I did for him sounded fucking great. And he's psyched about the next one. Like he's doing better work than he ever did. And I'm not.
That tends to happen often.
Yeah. Because he's also using his energy more efficiently. He hasn't got 17 windows to tweak.
This is the greatest.
He's driving in with one, and it's not.
This is why we should invest in each other
In relationships.
Yeah.
Michael,
Yeah, I know.
what do we got over there? Is your doodle?
Just admiring the brilliant illustration work in the June 1970 edition of Scientific American.
Are we going to have to take away your nice things so you can join us in the conversation here? Is that where we're headed? Do we have to take away your toys?
I can't get away with I keep drawing metaphors to what you're saying.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Drawing metaphors.
Thinking about what the master bus of a design is, and thinking about what a individual track effect would be.
Have you come up with anything?
Starting to, but nothing too matured yet.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. I think like there's a lot of ways you could probably slice it. Could be an overall color grading thing, over a whole image. So like, but it could also be an overall tonal thing. It's really like, I feel like the master bus is this overarching thing over the whole song. It's the ability to change sort of qualities of the entire song.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of what I would feel like is like you're filling an entire image, let's say a photograph, you're just laying a color right on top of it. And then, there's metaphors there.
No, it is.
I texted Michael while we were talking that the mix template equals design system,
Yes.
Yeah.
which was so interesting. It's like somebody
Yes.
else's ideas
No,
that you...
I'm not buying that. Go on, finish
No.
the point. Finish the point.
It can be.
No,
It doesn't have to be, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah, the difference
But
is
it
you have to
is.
make it up every time from scratch. It's like a template and a design. That's what a design system is. It's a template session. It has preloaded colors, fonts, the hierarchy of the fonts, the shapes, the symbols to be deployed quickly in a performance
Okay.
where you go blank and don't think about it.
Yeah.
Like it's creating.
I
the
don't have
environment.
multiple, so I can't fully dive into that water. I don't have the punk rock template. I don't have the hip hop template or the top 40 template. I don't have that. I have my template that specifically is to give me headroom to recolor and color the way that I see fit. So it's different.
There are ways that it's different.
So there's ways that it's different and ways that it's similar. The way it's different is I actually have templates for Instagram posts or a story.
Yeah,
or
and it's more like
something
making tracks.
That's
It's more
closer
like
to a mix.
producing.
That's closer to a mixed
It has
template to me.
grids and guidelines and things like that. And then there's
I have my reverbs and my delays.
then there's the samples that we're throwing in, because I do still believe that design is sort of up the chain along the production songwriting side of things, then down the chain of mixing, mastering.
That's how I feel about the template. It's the instruments in the room.
In a way, some forms of design like social media content is the whole thing. I'm mixing, mastering it, and releasing it, right? So
That's good. That's good.
It's the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I am thinking about, well, how's this red going to show up on Instagram when it compresses? Like,
You thought about that for so long.
Yeah.
I mean, you A/B'd. You tried.
Yeah.
It's ongoing.
Had to increase font sizes and all that. And Instagram will change their compression algorithm, hopefully. Fingers crossed. If you hear me, please.
One thing that is guaranteed, these things will change
Yeah.
over time.
Yeah, these mediums will all change. I mean, all the mediums we're on. So, so I see a lot of parallels there, and I think it's important. I think where the design system is super helpful is the same place where the template's helpful, and that's where the overlap is, which is there's less thinking about the same thing you've already thought of. And as a result, more doing, but not only more doing, like really relaxed doing.
It's getting yourself you're getting yourself out of the way.
Well, yeah, because you're
by creating an environment where there's less friction and less pauses, and you just flow.
And I would just add that it's because if you don't have the template, you're now trying to invoke your long-term memory of like, oh shit, what was that thing I did? Okay, let me recreate my template every time.
Yeah.
And now you're
It's not where you want the energy to go.
And now you've wasted all that energy. Now you're frustrated. You're doubting yourself like, oh, I feel like there's something there, but I'm not sure, and there might be. And now you're already starting the mix or whatever, and you're at a disadvantage. So that's where the design system helps. If you know the font to use, you don't need to think about what font to use. If you know the font size to use,
you've got other
you don't need
things
to think about it.
about.
Yeah.
Can I?
And then you get higher order thinking. Yeah.
Can I jump off on this for a second? Because I think it's something that came to mind earlier in the conversation. This idea that where on some kind of linear track and that we're getting better. We as engineers, in the broadest sense, mixing, mastering, recording, whatever, and that we start off naive and we get better and better and better, and all the way along we are closer to being able to realize those records that we imagine, the best records, the most engaging records. And the reality is that quite often we end up going down, sometimes they're years long, sort of blind alleys in terms of approaches or techniques or overcomplicating. There's the 17 plugins on your master bus blind alley that you can spend 6 months or a year sort of.
This is the maze labyrinth sort of
curating
model of
that
it.
thing. And it's like, oh, if the second multiband is in front of the third clipper and that pushes into the saturator, that sounds better. And it probably does sound different. But if all of them went away and you went for a single compressor EQ, maybe that's better. So this idea that progress is kind of non-linear, that we often talk about it in terms of doing rooms, we try to avoid situations that will involve people stepping back before they can go forward again. Yeah. So how can we work with someone to treat their room within a given budget with a view to their 5-year plan, such that if they get further along in their plan and success comes sooner, that we don't have to rip it all out and then start down a different road. Yeah. It's like, what is 3/4 of the ultimate plan or 2/3 of the ultimate plan, and how can we integrate that? And and the other point that came to mind was kind of looking at other disciplines, things that we're not any good at, and sort of imagining or don't know anything about, like poetry or oil painting or making wine or drinking wine. And sort of often I find empathy for people who are lost with 17 plugins on the master bus when I think about things that I enjoy that I don't know anything about, like wine. I've been wine tasting. I've tasted.
You mean if you have 17 plugins on your master bus, you don't know anything about audio engineering? Is that what we're saying?
No, because I know that each of us at this table could find a record that had 17 plugins on the master bus that we love, and this is something that we touched on last week. But that's not probably the optimum way to get there. It is occasionally the way to get there. Sometimes it's the only way to get there, but it's not.
That's a rare destination.
On probabilities, it's not likely to get you there, because it is 17 things between you and the artist.
Right.
And I love that about the way that you speak about this. It's always this kind of minimizing the distance between the intent and
can I justify putting this between the moment of inspiration and the listener?
Yes, and it goes a step deeper because Michael said something early on in his trying to draw a metaphor between the two, and I think it is difficult. I don't know if the templates are the same. I'm not fully convinced of this, but one thing you said early, which is the overall color gradient of the piece. I don't necessarily know how Photoshop works, but I would imagine there's a bunch of layers and there is like a master image, right, that has to be exported, correct? So you're going to do an overall, it could be like a overall vignette on the
rendering.
A rendering, yeah. So
you're going to do an overall rendering, and you could add an overall vignette, and I do actually for certain things.
Yeah, so that's like the one that comes to mind. Is a vignette is really cinematic, and I think about like a style of mixing that I do that's a bit rounded off on certain things on the top end, right? So it feels warm, and you can kind of see the edge, and it's not just endless shelving at 12K.
The Farron compressor is that.
Right.
It's an overall color
exactly
akin
what
to
I'm
the
getting
overall
at.
red
That's
that
what
you
I'm-
use on Nathan's HitLab.
And I also
posts.
use like a very subtle grain texture over all of their
That's why people
posts.
use tape machines. Or
Right.
There's an overall aesthetic that you can put on your mix bus that says, this is what I would like music to sound like. I would like to argue that if someone disagrees with that you can choose to take it off or say, fuck that, this is how my records sound. I mean, I think each one is applicable and arguable there.
Does it enhance the voice of the artist?
Exactly.
And your voice
at the same time. It has to do both.
Win-wins, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think there are parallels with the overall rendering. And I mean, I have an aesthetic that I like, and I drive towards it every occasion I can. And if it's not met with excitement, I will pull back from there, and there's probably a compromise on it. I think as I get further and further in my career, more people come for that aesthetic, and then like
and you take the
percentage
to put it out there.
Yeah.
Well, you communicate it very
so it
clearly.
can be recognized.
This is the goal. You know, this is, we talked about at dinner. You know, my project is to communicate a set of values into the world, to find people who share them. And you've been very clear on your Instagram, on interviews you've done, in any time you connect publicly, you're very clear about what it is you like, what it is you are driving for. Not saying that, you know, you're not the tail wagging the record's dog, but you have a way of hearing music, a way of this warm, and I sort of mischaracterized it last time we spoke, and you called me on it, and you were right, but you have an aesthetic. And the idea is to find people who share it, not to beat people into submission with it. You know what I mean?
No. People
You're not going to
recognize
take
it. That's why they show up to AES to hear you talk.
Exactly.
In these different rooms.
It isn't to make punk bands have you mix their record with warm, you know, bottom end and dynamics.
I kind of want
Although
to
I would really want to do
I want to
that.
hear that.
I'm really feeling
I'd like
that
to
right
mix a
now.
metal record with fat low end. Like I could do it. I've done it in Long Island.
I mean, I kind of
15
want to
years
get
ago.
like Fugazi up here in
Yeah.
the loft
Sure.
and like make a record in
I'm down. So
2020.
this is it. We're putting it out there now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's about communicating a set of values into the world and finding people who share them.
I actually think, like, to take it even a step further, not genre specific, I think all music could benefit from full band, full range,
High contrast.
I think physics is physics in this case.
I think so, and I think that's kind of been my overall thesis of mixing. That I think all genre of music can benefit from, the full frequency spectrum.
And unless you've experienced it, it's hard to explain.
Yes.
Yeah, and there are a lot of people. There's a kind of a poverty in that space at the moment.
A poverty of monitoring.
But looping back to our initial conversation, it's not all that's missing. I think there's a lot of good songwriting and good playing and good expression and communication missing too.
Definitely.
Agreed.
So
agreed.
if we fix that one problem of full frequency range, full dynamic range, full textural range, I don't think it would make
the earlier
it would clear the way.
Exactly.
It's important.
The earlier you figure that out in the process, the more possibility for a better song to be written, right?
Again, think about trends moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
Yes. So the best recording engineer in the room is going to remove that friction from the best song being able to be created, right?
Even,
so I actually think that engineers, especially in songwriting sessions that are put on by publishing companies and in studios that have highly inadequate engineer staff, they're disrupting the creative process in a sense because they don't have.
That's the definition of being bad at it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I think there's more of that. Then there is
agreed
the Dennis Kosiak that's doing the best the highest level of recording to get out of the way and understand that, and when it's time to make his move and put his flavor, his aesthetic on the record, it's in that right time, his voice, right? So he's the perfect example of what I'm getting at, is that he allows Khalid to be his best self. So by the time it gets to me, when him and I are mixing it together, it feels like dude. Exactly. It feels like dude.
Yeah.
You're totally right. I guess my bigger perspective here is that I'm not talking about this as a mixer. I'm talking about this as the general engineer we keep referring to, that from the start of the process.
And as a feeler of music.
Yeah. That's the beginning. Ooh, such a deep feeler of music.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I have these kind of almost combative responses to things.
I think it's great.
Protective.
We're trying to drill down to better.
But we haven't drilled down to your aversion to the term saturation to my satisfaction. I don't know about.
So we can. Well, I think that.
Thank you.
I think that saturation is kind of a dirty word for me because it's become a sort of
Catch-all?
a catch-all, or this idea of it as a panacea or a catch-all for energy, excitement, color, vibe.
But it seems so. I mean, we can use the term and we know what we mean. So what are we missing?
Well, his point is we know what we mean, but does everybody know what they mean?
I don't know. I'm curious about Rory's discomfort specifically. Like, why is it
The discovered is
too
the catch-all.
blunt? Too blunt a term.
Blunt.
Yeah. What makes you uncomfortable about it?
I suppose, yeah. I guess it's kind of kind of imprecise, and it's the same language used by a lot of people who don't really understand how to use it effectively. So I'm trying to come up with something, a metaphor that would make that clear. I don't know. I'll have to sit on that.
While
for
you
a
think
minute.
on that, I talk about this a lot with Matt Rad, because people constantly talk about why they like compressors because of their saturation and their color that the tube limiter or tube compressor of the 70s would give. It's like, well, the compressor is saturating, right? So when I use the term saturation, I'm not talking about the compressor saturating, even though I'm aware of that. So I think Rory's point, or one of the points, is we're using it way too loosely versus a more intentional understanding of what could possibly saturate. Everything saturates, right? Every piece of hardware, every plugin, every tool does some sort of saturation. So it's a blanket term used for, I mean, when I talk a lot about exciters, an exciter is a form of a saturating tool, but it's an exciter. It's a different tool. It's very additive. It's not, there's very little subtractive nature to it.
Yeah, and it tends to be band limited.
Yes, and it tends to be band limited, but that's a saturating tool. But so is an LA2A. But that's also doing another thing.
Okay. So maybe what I'm imagining, so when I say the word distortion, okay, in Rory's head, there are like 12 lanes.
Yes, agreed. Yes.
Do you see what I mean? But when people think about distortion, they think about a cringy feeling, right?
Or a great feeling. Or the guitar
Yeah,
amp.
sure.
Yeah.
Like but it's a feeling. It's not a objective reality about the ways sounds interact and
can be changed or
can
modified.
be changed
Yeah.
and can be modified, right? So
Again, ear training, learning different kinds of distortion.
but it's also there's intermodulation distortion. You have to understand the fundamental principles that are at play in intermodulation distortion to understand even what it is.
Sure.
To understand tangential modes in a room, you have to understand what modes are. You see what I mean? So that's why I was imagining you were having discomfort with saturation, because it's way more complex.
Where's it coming from?
In the way distortion is complex.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably getting to it. I feel like most of the time it's kind of this idea that this is good, so we'll saturate it and it will be better. It will be more. It's like
It's way simpler.
You liked that bread, you'll like it better with more butter.
More
And
decapitator.
It's like, decapitator.
But we've
is
all
one.
put decapitator on things and it wasn't better.
No.
Sometimes it was.
No. That's great that you said that,
What do you
and that's
mean?
very true.
I'm
It's
just
not.
saying.
No.
Saturation doesn't make everything better.
I don't know. I think it does to a lot of people's
Then
ears.
why
because
stop turning up the knob?
We're getting to it. We're getting to the heart of this, because this is what happens is
Why
that you're
stop saturating?
this flip between reality and the imagined thing. So someone, an engineer is in a room and she is working on a track and the snare is weak. And she imagines that saturation, that decapitator will make it more exciting. She puts it on and lo and behold, it is more exciting. She feels it's louder, it's hitting harder, and
more forward.
more
got a little
forward.
snap on the
It's
front,
got
whatever. Yeah.
She hears it as she imagined it would be,
Right.
and she moves on.
Right.
And John gets that track to mix, or I get that track to master later, and it's like, what the fuck is going on with the snare? She's listening in a very narrow context. She's listening to the problem, and the problem
Yes.
was solved.
Right.
The narrow problem of the
Yeah.
snare not having impact.
Right.
But the intent of the track, which is looping back to our
The
bigger
context
conversation,
of the track.
the context of the track was not
lost.
served.
Sure.
And I feel that saturation and distortion often are thrown at problems as kind of as a catch-all solution.
So engineers aren't zooming out as they zoom in.
Well, you're assuming that someone will try it, listen to it, and interrogate the result properly, and often that's not the case.
No.
Often that doesn't happen.
Yeah,
what happens is that they get the initial sort of scale change or level boost or impact difference, and they're like, job done, next. And the next thing, of course, next to the now screamingly bright forward snare is, bass isn't really hitting now, really. So, okay, next problem. Let's put the capture on that.
Well,
and now we've started this sort of war that ends with 17 plugins on the master bus.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, but let's set aside inexperienced engineers.
Okay.
I'm saying like the adding saturation doesn't always make things better.
No.
Right? You can go over the edge where you sort of lose the the emotional lens goes too far. When you zoom a lens in and out, you can go too far, right? There's a sweet spot. And there's a sweet spot with saturation. So that's all I'm saying is it's not always the answer to things.
No.
You can't just we would just go forever with saturation if that were true.
Here is a guideline that
I'm talking about.
Go ahead.
No, you please.
Here's a guideline that I never see put in print, or I never see in Mix with the Masters, is if your mix is, or your arrangement is sparse, you can get away with far more distortion on the individual elements. If it's kick, snare, bass, vocal, and one synth, we can distort any of those elements way more than we can if there are a lot of things going on. And we talked about how distortion, limiting turns down, or compression mostly turns down energy. It throws away energy. Clipping and distortion, saturation, they spread that energy across the band.
Right.
You don't lose that energy. So what you're doing is filling up the available space.
Right.
That's a simple
decreasing dynamic.
And really decreasing contrast. So how many times can we fill up the available space? If we imagine that we have a mix space of 0 to 10, and the kick is at 1, the snare is at 3, the vocal is at 5, the guitar is at 7, whatever. And if we clip one of them, we're putting energy in all those available spaces, those pockets, right?
Yeah.
If we clip all of them, those spaces are getting overloaded.
I'm not any closer to understanding your aversion to saturation.
Same. I was just thinking about that what you just depicted is the art of mixing popular music.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like everything occupies all of the space.
The balancing act.
Well, no, this is the thing. So this gets back
to
the
bangarang.
This gets back to our initial point is I don't care if your track is dynamic. I care that it feels dynamic.
Yes,
and that's what you
was. But I've been arguing.
And that is the true art of mixing popular music.
Yes.
Is to play.
That's what I'm saying.
Is to make a mix where the meter seemingly pins from start to end and feels like it's got all this color and tone change and movement.
It's so fun. To be honest, it's fun.
It's an incredible set of constraints.
The crawl space, I think, is an amazing way to think about it.
Yes. So that we're as the burgundy wears off, we're finally tying together the many threads of this conversation. But I think that
except for your,
you realize we were just drinking a Riesling, but the burgundy was earlier.
Yeah,
we went to Germany, but we went to Mosel.
I was asleep on the plane. But. So
every thread except for this saturation thing.
I think mostly it's
the way it's deployed.
Yeah, mostly, and the way that it's portrayed as the answer to all problems. It's kind of like
it's one of the many.
It's a powerful tool.
Silver bullets that have been presented by various.
Yes, it's a powerful tool that inherently makes you feel something from its addition, right? There's going to be
an emotional change,
right? And it's in that moment that you can step back and choose whether it was an improvement,
better or worse.
I hate that.
Better. I mean, say eye doctor shit.
Because
everyone's sort of done it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yes. Is it
truer to the intent or less so?
Yes.
It's
clearer or less clear.
Instead of it's like the reason the original impetus for me uninstalling the Waves bundle from my computer was every time I would put a CLA 76 on a track just to try it because everyone says it's the best plugin, it makes it louder. Like any plugin that when I put it on, it makes it louder. It's cheat shit. Get that off my computer. I don't want anything that when you put it on, before anything is engaged, it dramatically changes the source material because it's a trick. It just says all of a sudden it's different, so it could be better. Is it better though?
Conspicuous.
It's exactly. I want to take that knob and turn it, and then it fucks with it, and then I determine if I like that or if the person next to me likes that, and have that control, the minimal control that we even have in our lives, right? Like, like.
Wait,
Well, that's a whole.
Yeah, we're not going there.
I think we should totally go there.
I'm not ready for that.
I might need a break.
And Riesling, more Riesling.
I might need to do jumping jacks and a bunch of push-ups.
I think to your saturation point though, like there's the philosophy behind how to use saturation, and then there's using saturation and the tools that like help you do that. And like the philosophy is going to guide the tools you choose. I think where what I'm perceiving your frustration with people's use of saturation is how they're thinking about it and how they're using it. It seems like, but there's nothing wrong with the word. It's just how people are taking that same root word with a different philosophy and then using it poorly. And we have a different understanding of it. So I totally get where you're like, the other side of the tracks, saturation is not the same thing we're even talking about. You know,
it's more to me that that modern sort of plug-in and gear companies, it's kind of like, the opening gambit is, well, saturation is the answer. What was the question? Mojo is the answer. What was the question? It's like maybe
that's philososophy in my opinion.
And it's not fair to blame the. It's not fair to blame the young engineers particularly. Right. I think they've been sold a bill of goods by the companies involved.
And you're essentially trying to raise awareness in this situation. I think your discomfort is ultimately and can be turned into an attempt to raise awareness to the competing philosophies.
I'm struck by two things. There's I think often when we think of younger engineers or people are who we might feel are that we would want to critique, it's often they're picking from a menu, and the menu is very small. They're picking from the stuff that they're being sold or the options that they think they have.
The design system, the consensus design system.
Yeah, their intention might be likely is often very good, but the choices they're making are from a list of kind of like, oh, the drums don't have energy, so I'm going to. I remember, and I don't think I've told this story, but I remember working with an artist one time. We were doing on that TV show I worked on. I was stage managing, and it was her name will come to me. She's a kind of a rootsy singer-songwriter, American, very good. And she was totally cool, had a great instrument. Front house engineer was great. And so I was hanging back, very, very little involvement, and heard her say, can I get the vocal brighter in the wedges? And the engineer was like, sure, no problem. And I'm coiling up cables or whatever, organizing the stage. And again, 2 minutes later, 5 minutes later, she asked, can I get the vocal brighter in the wedges? And he's like, yeah, and kind of thinking of feedback and worrying. We're doing a two-air TV show, so feedback is not okay. And a couple of minutes later, she asked again, I'm struggling to hear the detail in the vocal. Can I get the vocal brighter in the wedges? And the engineer is kind of like, he's a really quiet guy and he's really reserved. And he's like, yeah, he doesn't. So I step up and I sort of say, hey, can I take a listen? And she sings and plays. And I said, can I try something? And she's like, sure. And I said, Chris, can we get the guitar darker in the wedges? And he darkens the guitar. And I said, can we put the vocal back to where it was at the start? And bang. And she plays, and she's like, she was in her 50s at this point. She was like, how have I been doing this for this long and no one's ever shown me this? Yeah. Like, how is this the first time I'm seeing someone do this? And I was like, I don't know. It's, and
I love when that happens.
She she was just like, this is so clear and simple, and she was never going to get enough to get over the jangly bright guitar.
That's it, yeah.
And there was a reason, there was a jumping off point for this, which
Saturation?
Oversaturation.
no, the menu of available options.
Oh.
yeah.
Yes.
The menu she was reading from was make the
More.
vocal brighter, make the
Right.
vocal brighter, how bright do you want your
Additive.
vocal?
Maybe because
Yes.
every engineer she ever talked to had an additive mindset.
Sure.
Yes.
And so the menu broadened to we can darken the guitar and get you the same result. And of course, there's too far, and the guitar gets dark and murky and lumpy, and you don't want that. So I feel a sort of an empathy for engineers who are reading from that limited menu.
Yeah, I always use the example, like I don't ever print or want to print a vocal up mix. If someone asks, if the only note back from an artist is, can you turn the vocal up? It means something's in the way. It's very rare that the vocal is not at the right level. I mean, the song is the vocal. Like I'm supposed to be mixing the vocal. I mean, that's the first thing. So that's the mentality every time. I can't even remember like that not being the way that
It's a relative. Relationships are the gig.
Yes. It's like, oh, well, maybe that synth is in the way. Maybe that thing needs to be. And we have so many tricks and tools on how to get things out of the way of the vocal these days. It's like,
Could always be that thing up or another thing down.
I love thinking of it in a live example though, that because you're up against feedback. You're up against a
hard limit.
a hard limit. And it seems like in record making, we don't actually believe there's a hard limit, but there's a hard limit, right? There is a ceiling. There is a zero.
The hard limit, you pay the price later, and you pay it with long-term engagement. So you can win the short-term battle, and I won't listen to the track more than once.
Yes.
You know, so it's about you're trading off that sort of, and that's the space that I think you play in very well, which is how can I win? How can I compete in the short term and win in the long term, as opposed to sort of taking?
No, how can the client?
Well, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
No,
I was talking
the
about
copyright
this.
owners.
I was talking about this at dinner 2 nights ago with my manager, his wife Karen, and my girlfriend Niku. We're there, and I don't know why it came up. Nathaniel and I are really good, not talking about work at the dinner table, and Karen at one point asked, how would you describe what you do to somebody? And I was like, wow, the conversations crew, we've been trying to figure out this the whole time. I don't even have an answer for you. I'm like, I looked at Niku, I was like, we don't really even talk about what I do. You know, I've sent a couple of songs her way that they're like the Rob Moose string arrangement songs, you know, it's like nothing that is the pop music that I'm working on. It's always the thing left, like, you're going to think this is beautiful and whatever. And the only thing I could think of is that I'm doing my best to make a record stand the test of time. Like that's what I'm doing. I'm not making it sound better. Like that can't be an answer. Could I make the record sound better? Could I make it feel better? Sure. But my ending, my goal, the reason I do it,
the orientation.
Yeah.
Focus.
The analogy.
But the inherent reason for me to touch the record is so that it can last.
It endures.
What were you going to say?
We've used this talking to people, to younger engineers, but it's like I can get anyone's attention by shouting at them, you know, in the short term. I can shout at you twice and you'll probably pay attention to me twice in a row. If I keep shouting, I'm a maniac, but I certainly won't have your attention long term. And that's what I feel like is going on with a lot of modern record making is this trade-off of short-term shouting, and we're losing out on long-term engagement.
Yes. That's been my argument the whole
time. When
time.
I said you competing and you, I had completely, I'm in my mind, you are representing the artist. You're fully,
of course,
embodying there. It's not you competing as John, the mixing guy, competing against many.
It does go without saying,
it's
but
the artist competing.
It does go without saying, but it is worth repeating.
It highlights a mindset because we're not talking about competing with other. The competing with other mixers is you communicating this value set into the world and finding people who share it, which is what we talked about.
To me,
earlier,
it makes no sense to compete against other mixers. We want to all be connected. We want to all be aligned to a degree, right? We're like, there's so much work to go around. And Michael seems to have something to say.
At least learning from each other.
You're smiling.
No, I was just going to say, I always love when the conversation shifts back to philosophy.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's what's missing here. I think when you're speaking about saturation and why you're frustrated with it, it's because people are going into it with the wrong intention. That's the first thing they see, or the second or the third or whatever. And then they abuse it. You know, they overuse it.
The right intention and the wrong menu, the wrong understanding of the tool set.
This limited menu thing, I wanna maybe push back on it, because we have made a concerted effort to limit our personal menus, and a limited menu is sort of the goal.
Yeah.
So to say that a limited menu is the problem, that's not the problem.
No.
It's what's on that limited menu. It's not that it's limited.
Yes. Much better.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually, I think the menu is clumsy. It's a clumsy analogy.
Well,
but
you're at
we'll
the local diner menu versus the.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is going to get to elite territory.
No.
The quality of the menu items.
Yes.
Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Menu aside, I want to be a good restaurant. I want someone to come to me because they like my genre. They like whatever voice that I come to. And I think that's something to aspire to. And just in general, I'm still aspiring to be revisited. You know, I don't want to be the hot restaurant on Eater for a year or two and get the James Beard Award and like do this. And then in 4 years from now, no one comes and eats and I have empty tables. Like that's really what we're getting at if we're going to talk about menus.
And that's the way you treat your relationships. I mean,
yes.
It's a
longer
long-term vision.
view. Yeah.
And if you want to talk about long-term vision, that's kind of what we've been getting at with, you know, choosing that tool, the saturator to use. Is that saturator affecting the snare that is then affecting the bigger picture? And it's understanding that bigger picture that, you know, sets us apart from the...
Man, that bigger picture is coming into my mind a lot. And I just think about how much listening you need to do to understand that big picture.
Yeah.
And how, like, just the sheer hours of listening to different kinds of music with all kinds of different mindsets enhances your ability to zoom out.
Yeah.
You know?
I think that's what we kind of been drilling down to, is really the ability to zoom out versus when you're zoomed in, what you use. I mean, we do our best as friends and not at this table, like, or at this table. It's just everywhere we try so hard to not talk about the tools that we use. It's not even we try hard, it's just not inherently what our discussion is. And I think we're getting dangerously close to it. And I think we've kind of said what we need to say about
that. I mean, that
Yeah,
actually comes to a really interesting thing that I've been thinking about. Since our conversation went into this performance mode where we're sort of equating the mix of a record to like the final laps of an F1 race or something. There's no real mental calculation of the cornering and the stuff that's happening in the car. You're just doing it because you trained and it's race day.
Yes.
So thinking about that performance mode, but to get to performance mode, this is the thing that I think everyone wants, and they don't really talk about it that way. And so this stuff that, that people can do to train themselves to get to performance mode. I think that's a lot where the struggle is. Like where people are battling with problems, they're not in a performance mode because their intuitions don't match the way the mix feels in the outside world. So they're not able.
Right. It's not connecting at all to even them who's attempting to make it connect to a million people or more.
Yeah. So extracting the lessons from a high performance level mixing and bringing that so people who are not in that performance space can build toward it and work toward it. That seems to be an interesting thing to me.
Yes.
That's come into focus because of the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still haven't had enough time to kind of sit with that because we kind of hit it yesterday.
Yeah.
And I still haven't thought too much about it because it goes back to our good enough conversation that we've been kind of debating for the past couple of weeks, even though we've kind of pushed it aside. The idea that something could be good enough. I don't... I don't think about value judgments when I'm making moves, right? Even though your argument is that there's no way you couldn't be. Like, you're biologically, that's what you're doing, right? And it's that think versus performance mode is
Right.
I could think about every move and say, is this better? Is this not? But I've done that legwork for 15 plus years to get to a performative place. If it took you to do 5
days to do one mix, you'd be trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's where most people are at.
Right. And I liked separating myself from where I'm at now in that moment, understanding that. I still don't think that the language good enough needs to be what it is to describe that moment of convergence and moving on to next thing. I don't necessarily.
Yeah, I'm open to that.
Sure. I do think that it's a placeholder in this conversation for
perfectionists
to reclaim the term good enough. I think that's a fair enough placeholder. I think we can do better.
I just did some research on performance mindset. When you said performance mode, I'm like, I've heard that before. And like, there is a term, performance mindset, a lot of like manager training, executive trainings type things. But I read this article and it has the 3 principles behind it. And I love this because I think that this is a lot of what we touch on here. One is mindfulness. The second one is self-discovery. And then the third is mental skills, which they refer to as just like any skill that you can learn with your brain. So I think we cover all of those in our conversations here. We've spoken about meditation before. I think what we've been talking about today is the mental skill and the self-discovery, like knowing what your intentions are, your personal philosophy, etc., and then the skills to actually bring something to life. And it seems as though you defined it. You added the word to this. So, yeah.
I'm struck by the idea that you need to hear what it is and imagine what it could be.
See,
when you hear a mix or a master or a raw vocal performance off the floor, you need to really hear what you've got and imagine where you could take it or how you could make it more what it is. More like itself, or more a bigger version of, or and I love in the, as you say, the kind of crawl space analogy with Dale, you're really existing in that space too, in mixed land of kind of where people think they might have run out of options. You're creating options. You're giving people the result they want in a way that doesn't have knock-on effects, or in a way that minimizes knock-on effects, or reframes them in a way that's useful to you. For me, I guess in mastering, I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to give people the level they want, the excitement they want, without the long-term damage to engagement that just clipping and destroying things often does in mastering,
I was listening recently to, you guys might have all heard it, but it was 3 podcasts ago on Sam's podcast with, what's his name? Barry Kaufman, The Good Life, and like what a good life could look like and be, which is so interesting to me, just like so basic, what a good life could be. He talks about his definition of intelligence is the apprehension of what is. Imagination is the apprehension of what could be, and then creativity is the combination of both of those, which I thought was super interesting, because when what you're talking about, when I'm listening in that moment, it's, okay, well, what is there in what was given to me? What's actually there, the source material? What could be?
Which is a fantasy.
Exactly.
Until
it's otherworldly.
It happens.
I mean, music at this point, most music, unless you're talking about a raw guitar and vocal, is completely otherworldly.
You're imagining the feeling it could give you.
Yes. And I'd like that. But yes. And to a degree, it's giving me that feeling because the artist has that intention there.
It's teasing it. Maybe not delivering it all the way, or as fully.
Yes. So there is a level of imagination that has to be played there. And I think there's technical approaches as an engineer to achieve that creative point of view and that move. But
it's so interesting because every one of those fantasies represents priming. It primes your brain to hear.
That's what I was getting at earlier.
Which is why the zoom out is so...
This real imagined, or zoom in, zoom out. And I think a lot of people are hearing they're hearing what they want to hear, or they're hearing the story they've been told.
The marketing behind a plugin.
And they're not stepping back and hearing the reality of what Decapitator just did
what
to the
it's
snare.
done to the vibe.
or to the
song.
mix, or to the, and sort of, just what it does to the overall composition. It's like we could, if we focus on the yellows in a Van Gogh painting, we could probably make the yellows more exciting. We could go in and Photoshop them and make those yellows really fucking pop. But the overall composition now is out of balance. The
relationships,
the original intent, the contrast, the depth, all of that. And I feel so often in modern record making, that's what we're doing, where we're sort of enhancing, like giving steroids to one aspect of a sound or a groove or whatever, and throwing the entire intent or production under the bus.
Yeah, completely missing where it was existing before you did anything to it. Yeah.
There's a mastering engineer, I mentioned him before, a guy called Bob Olson, who was used to work at Motown, and when he teaches mastering, he in a university, he makes the kids listen to records and listen some more. And when it comes time to master, he gives them one band of the stock EQ in Pro Tools. One move is what you're allowed to make as their, in their first classes. You can do one thing to this mix. What will it be? So will you add low end? Will you cut mid range? Will you boost top end?
Yeah, me too.
I like this challenge.
And the way you listen to the mix when you know that you've only got one move to make is going to be different. It's going to inform.
Priorities.
Yeah, it's priorities, and it's a way of listening to the whole that I think is useful. Could be more useful. And I
gotta go on feeling.
I fail this test a lot, and I'm trying to get better at it all the time. We talked last week about sort of my ambition in this area. It's about that, hearing the whole and then being able to bring it, and my hands are more tied than yours typically.
I've been thinking about this today because my buddy who messaged me during this said this exact quote: "I'm hella zoomed in, and your ability to zoom in and out is super impressive." Ooh. And I was like, "Damn, you must be reading my text or something." But no, like what I realized in my career, I remember the day that I had this conversation. I told Spider about it about a week ago. I was walking to a happy hour with a software engineer, and he was trying to understand like what designers actually do. And I was explaining this whole idea of zooming in and zooming out. I said I take an aerial view and a ground view. I remember how I explained it at the time, like a bird could do, right? And thinking about, he's always so honed in, mostly on lines of code. And as soon as I said that, before I even continued, he's like, wait, I didn't even think about that as a concept, right? And so I'm really happy we're having this conversation, because if nothing else, just knowing that you have to do both, that there is this mechanism at play, even if you're already doing it, is so important to like really add that vocabulary, like we said earlier, to your mind that you can then call to when you need it. It'll help you kind of snap out of being too zoomed in. You don't know you're too zoomed in if you don't know that you could be zoomed in.
It's a dimension to consider.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I never really thought about it as that. I always just felt very natural. I sat at the computer, I zoomed in, I zoomed out. Not physically, but mentally too. Like, how does this app look? How does it look on the phone? You know?
With you.
But it really is a thing. It's a thing you have to do. It's a thing to practice. It's to the article I had up before, it's a mental skill. It's not something that you're just gifted with naturally. You have to develop it. And just one more anecdote is I remember reading about, I was like super obsessed with Steve Jobs around like, as everyone was, iPod days and whatnot, but reading some stories of his, and he frequently mentioned, and people around him frequently mentioned, that one of his greatest skills was his ability to zoom out. And I think that might have been one of the first times I even noticed that was a skill that like I did. But hearing that, like that was why, not the only reason why, obviously, but an element as to why he was so great. Because he could look at all this cool gadgetry that I'm sure was on the boardroom table, right? Like shit we'll never see, we've never seen. And be like, no, You know what I mean?
Yeah.
From a zoomed out way.
Zoomed
like
out
even
from
though
100-year perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
Zoomed out culturally, technologically, all in all of these dimensions to be like yes or no quickly and in an informed way. And I think that has been really helpful for me. It was super helpful today for the work that I was doing on this project that he messaged me about. It's taxing mentally, and so that's where the mindfulness piece comes in. But man,
this is part of Rory's setup, sort of hypothesis that there's a sort of zoomed out station and a zoomed in station. There's a sort of physical engagement, standing, vibe, analog controls station, and then a micro editing sort of zoomed in station, and that the physical memory of moving between those modes will be helpful in sort of automating that mind shift.
Yeah, I love that. I love the physicality of it. I do wonder though, if
they're
you
too
get
different,
stuck
you'll be
zoomed in,
disoriented. But
like if someone gets stuck zooming in, that could be a way of like over time teaching yourself.
Well, there has to be
zoom
practice
out.
at play.
Yeah.
I mean, you can put time limits on these
Right.
things. I mean,
True. It's a good way.
I think it's actually, there's a practical approach to this.
Yeah.
I only spend this
I
much
agree.
time going deep, and then I stop and I do and I take a break.
yeah.
It could be
some
it could be-
discipline
Oh, so
too.
you're on a more of a scheduled basis?
I'm
with that
not.
in a
I just
way?
imagine it could be. I
Right.
actually kind of disagree on one point you made. I agree completely with everything else. Is that I think some people are probably gifted and born with the ability to do both. I don't.
That's
I mean,
true. That's true.
But it's like how, I talked about this with Matt yesterday. The confidence was something I had to learn, and I practiced confidence. Like I'm not inherently. I was never born that way, but now I could admit that I am a confident human to a degree in what I do. But I practiced it. Some
Right.
people are born confident, and there's no.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think
The ability to
the
zoom out probably comes easier to some
the skill
people than
part might even be what you're actually like knowing what the landscape looks like. What
You can
zoomed
get
out
better
means,
at it.
You know
That's
what I mean?
the
Yeah.
important
I
part.
guess that part you would improve over time, like what zoomed in means and how to do it, and what zoomed out means and how to
and
do it.
when to do it.
But
Jesus
yes,
Christ.
understanding your role, it brings me back to, Steve Jobs walking into a room and making a call on the spot. Like there are supportive roles, there are multiple roles, and the roles he would step back to hear what someone else had to say, and then he would assert. It's like I always come back to this string quartet kind of thing. That second violinist has the support, so the first violinist can step out and solo. Like the bass line has the support, so the vocalist can come out. Like all this, there has to be this push and pull,
providing
and
freedom.
If you, exactly. So, and if you don't have that capability, and you're practicing the ability to zoom out, bring someone else in, right? Bring someone else in to say, no, that's not you. You were better here. You already hit it.
That's you coming to my apartment tomorrow.
Yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait.
Yeah.
Yes, but from our dialogue in between, like I imagine that you didn't go too far before you would invite me to the room, right? And that's when you know that it's necessary, right?
Right. It's when Rory came.
Well, we're not
last
making
week
art
or the week
yet.
before. Yeah.
Sure.
We're not making art yet. We're making a design system.
Sure,
So
sure.
it's a different part of the process. Yeah.
But the ability to understand when it's time to bring in an outside perspective is part of this zoom out. You might actually not be able to zoom out. Doesn't mean that one cannot have the art be pushed up against the wall to be viewed from another position. You could be staying still, but someone else is saying, no, we're pushing it over here away from your hands. You're thinking about pressing or getting the people that are closest to the project to approve the final mix or song. But really what matters is the 10 million people that are going to listen to it, right?
Oh, yeah.
We have to balance this.
We have to get past the gatekeepers.
Yeah, the A&R has to approve it. So 19-year-old girls and boys will listen to it.
That's what I love about the way that
they're the gatekeepers.
You're drilling down on the it's the democracy ultimately.
Yeah.
Does the audience laugh? Was the joke funny or not?
Right.
Does the hit go or not?
Yeah.
But I love this thing that you do of reframing it around sort of there's sort of a set of constraints, and you're going to give them what they want and rebuild it internally so that it functions in the broader world better.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm the expert on what it should be.
Yeah, or one of them. You know, I'm supposed to be an expert, right? I'm supposed to be. That's what you talk about back to the doctor. Like, I want the expert surgeon that has done the 1,000 heart surgeries before they touch my left ventricle.
John,
you know?
John is the elite. He's
Lay
one
off
of the
my
elite.
left ventricle.
No, I mean, I cringe at that word too. I understand
What,
its place.
ventricle? It's
No, the elite word that Rory is like. I feel the same way that you do
I
about that
think-
every time I hear it, but I understand its place in the world.
I think
and-
it's hard to find someone who grew up in a country that was occupied for 800 years and have them go, the elite sounds awesome. Let's get some more of those elite.
I'm sorry, but that's every country.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, back to this. I think to your point, it's an interesting point I've had to deal with over the entire course of my career. Is like you're getting approval from one person who's not the person that is the audience that you're actually showing the thing to and you're making it for. And so
Yes.
I think what was good about the conversation, and when I started my independent practice, it was like, I'm not really going to think too much about that side of things, only as it's necessary, like to get that work over the line. But ultimately, I think the best way is just building trust with the people to say, look, do your thing, you know, and I'll take the ownership of failure as well, right? But what was really helpful at the same time, like there's certain terms, there's little nuances that could be flipped that wouldn't hurt the overall thing. And I don't know what the metaphor is in music. I was trying to think of it. I don't know if there is. It's more so like an email explaining a move you made when someone says change everything, you know, whatever. Like,
Yeah, we talk
how
about
did
this
you
sometimes
handle
at
it?
coffee. Yeah.
Right. So that's more so kind of what Rory was instructing on. And I thought it was really helpful of like,
Instructing.
yeah,
Sounds terrifying.
He was.
Oh, you mean
no.
It felt like you were
No, no, no.
instructing
when
me
I was
of-
with you guys? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
No, but it's also you're being led down a path, right? So
Yes.
like when we're doing acoustic stuff, you are really good at sort of anticipating people's confusion or expectations and then just putting that sort of next step down in front of them. And it's intuitive and I just see it unfolding naturally.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of the, like when you're in mix time, it's
Yeah.
leadership. You're leading people through the process, sort of making it easy for them.
Yeah, that part of the process.
Yeah.
This is more.
It's your
yeah.
part to
Yeah,
lead them
yeah.
through.
The producer had led through this part with the artist. Maybe before the manager led by putting the pieces together, who was going to produce the, you're passing the torch.
And Josh does
Yes.
it with the sort of file delivery expectations. And there's
You know,
like,
minimizing friction in the creative process for me
Yeah.
to do. Yeah.
I think this touches on the like narratives around explanations. So like how well can you explain something to someone that you're working with? Not necessarily about the move per se, but why did you make the decisions and are you communicating that in a way that will allow you to get feedback if you're looking for it?
Is effective.
I think that's really what we're talking about here because I do want feedback and it's more around the delivery of the entire thing in a way that will, ultimately what you're advising on is how to present it to get the optimal feedback if there is any.
You want him to understand your intention.
Right, exactly.
So
Yeah.
then he can get constructive
Yeah.
the
feedback
best
and
feedback,
criticism.
the most
Yes.
relevant.
The clearest so that I could either say yes or no to that, or I'll try it, or here's why I disagree with that or whatever. But he's able to deliver feedback that's clear enough because he understands it.
When you talk about reference points and listening, someone has to know or understand why I made the bass sound more Motown, right? They have to go, oh, I love how you brought out the bass in this record. Like you brought out the fingers, you brought out this thing. Like that has to be understood. There can't be a middle ground. So sometimes when I think engineers miss on a mix is because they didn't even fully go to what they were even aiming at. They left it in this middle ground of close to the rough, but like a little bit into there. Like it's not fully realized. So someone can't say, oh, that's I feel that. Now I feel what you were saying, but like, let's pull it back into this world a little bit. But at least you've met on, oh, you enhanced this.
Yeah.
Like there is a.
This is it's a topic is, when to hedge and people who hedge and when to go, I've thought about that with the first pass and mastering. It's like, I would rather overshoot on the first pass with my intent and pull back from there than sort of never let the artist know what I think is possible for the master. And they don't know the range, you know, of what's possible. So
Well, in a way, mastering this crawl space, I mean, really, we're talking about finding the limits in a way.
Yeah.
So if you don't show them the limits, how can they decide? It's
Yes.
yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. And sometimes it's in with a new producer or a bigger artist or a label you haven't worked with. It's like, you kind of want to be the safe pair of hands. You don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to take a risk. But also, if you think the record should be or could be something different, more brighter, louder, wider, deeper, more dynamic,
or
darker.
Or you could just say, like, I took it as far as I thought it could go.
Yeah.
This last year, I'm just deleting the emails. I write the email and then I just delete it. I'm like, here, you can download the files here. Let me know how it feels.
But you can think that. You can think that as an approach.
Yeah.
Like, I'll just take it as far as I think it can go, and if they want to come back, then we come back.
With the longer term relationships, I'll say to someone, listen, I kind of went there. I did it this last week, and I went there on a master, and and the engineer that I work with regularly hasn't responded yet, and I'm like, okay, the artist loves it, but I don't know if I went too far.
It could be. Engineer could be out of town. Like,
could be.
But
cool.
given the right relationship context, you can do anything.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's
the creative freedom, right?
It's one where when he knows that if I went too far, we'll just do it all again. Yeah. So it's one where I wanted to explore what was possible.
Yeah, that's the weird part. I've had with young artists specifically. It's rare, but it happens. They're like, oh, wait, can I ask for a change? Like, they almost feel bad about revisions. I'm like, no, I did that because that's how I thought it should sound, or that's how I felt it. It doesn't mean that I don't like how you had it. Like, let's talk about how you had it. And I mean, it's constant communication skill building here, but it's more fun. Like giving your approach and your creative vision and direction. It's just more fun. Like, aren't we doing this to have fun? I mean, we start as fans of music and design and vision, and that's what
you sit down and go.
You just go. And if it doesn't work out, no ego, put that aside. But go, because at the end of the day, the strongest relationships are going to be built on people that like when you go.
That's what they're coming to you for.
Yeah, they're coming.
You take care of yourself. Like, they're coming to you
it feels so much better.
How you're going to be in that moment.
Something that I do make an effort to communicate is when I do a pass and someone asks for a revision, if it's better, I'm very clear of, I'm really glad that you had me do X, Y, or Z, that you had me pull back the top end on that one, or I'm really glad that we, whatever.
Yes.
And really sort of underline, especially with people that I'm working with for a long time, is like with the client and the mixer that I work with regularly, with the client on copy, it's like, you were right on track 2. That was 100%
great note.
A great note. Make sure that you underscore that the feedback was heard, received, it made it better, and you're just like, oh, give me more of that. I'm open to it.
This is human nature. It's so basic.
It's basic.
This is what we do in real life. That was really good. I had a real fun time chatting with everyone about this. I mean, I think we went a bit more technical than we usually do, and it kind of felt good. It kind of felt right to kind of flex that muscle in ourselves,
in our repertoire.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, we'll see.
We need to do this distortion, the grand tour of distortion. We need to do that. Like all the different ways that distortion can happen to the audio that you're handling.
Yes, before it gets to you, of course.
When you're recording it, like the people upstream from you, I don't believe they know that all these kinds of distortion exist.
Yes, that's the clarity I'm getting at. That's enough clarity. How much further do we need to go to expose the fact that you offered so much clarity that we need to think about the level of distortion our DAC is giving us?
I think if I have a goal for the technical, any technical dives that we do on this podcast, it's to make them useful, to make them something that someone can tell someone else quickly and make it meaningful. What gets me so bent out of shape about the DR people is the idea that more dynamic is better. And so the idea that with DACs, lower distortion is better. In that case, actually, most of the time that's true, but it isn't always true. What I find with a lot of the technical stuff is that people have been sold a bill of goods in terms of what the metric is to measure or the framework for the conversation. And I like to try and, at least when we're doing work together, Spider, when we're out with people, try and make it more useful.
Sure.
Make it so that it serves our bigger goals.
Yeah.
Serves the artist.
It's funny. Every time you say DR, I hear Dior with your accent.
Same.
And I care very little bit about Dior, and I care even less about the DR crew.
Yeah, fuck those guys.
I hope so.
Conversations is produced and mixed by Dylan Seals. The Conversations theme was performed and recorded by the Hazelrick Brothers.